Good afternoon. I'd like to say a very special welcome to the officials from the Ministry of Planning and Development, the Ministry of Works and Transport, the Ministry of Rural Development and Local Government, Ministry of Agriculture, Land and Fisheries, Office of Disaster Preparedness and Management, and the Tobago Emergency Management Agency, who are joining us virtually. I am Lakram Bodo, Vice Chairman of the Public Administrations and Appropriations Committee, and the chairman of this afternoon's proceedings. The Committee on Public Administration and Appropriations, or the PAAC, has the mandate to consider and report to the House on A, the budgetary expenditure of government agencies to ensure that expenditure is embarked upon in accordance with parliamentary approval. B, the budgetary expenditure of government agencies as it occurs and keeps Parliament informed of how the budget allocation is being implemented. And C, the administration of government agencies to determine hindrances to their efficiency and to make recommendations to the government for improvement of public administration. The purpose of this meeting is to examine flood mitigation in Trinidad and Tobago, aligned with Sustainable Development Goal 11. The committee is desirous of hearing the challenges being faced by the key stakeholders in an attempt to determine some of the possible solutions to these challenges. So the role of this committee today is to examine the effectiveness and the efficiency of flood mitigation measures carried out by various stakeholders in Trinidad and Tobago, and to determine whether the flood mitigation measures are aligned with achieving Sustainable Development Goal 11. I'm also to advise that the meeting is being held in public and is being broadcast live on the Parliament's Channel 11 and Radio 105.5 FM and the Parliament's YouTube channel, ParlView. Viewers and listeners can send their comments related to today's topic via email parl101@ttparliament.org, facebook.com/ttparliament, and X, formerly Twitter, @ttparliament. So again, welcome members of the various ministries and agencies. I will just ask the members of the committee present here today to introduce themselves, and if I can start on my right.
Good afternoon and welcome, Senator Mark, member.
Good afternoon, Chairman and officials. Lawrence Hislop, member.
Good afternoon, everyone. Sharda Patisa, member.
Thank you, members. So if I can call upon the representatives from the various ministries to introduce themselves, and I could start. Can I start with the Ministry of Planning and Development?
Good afternoon, Chair and members. I am Marie Hanks, the Acting Permanent Secretary for the Ministry of Planning and Development.
Good afternoon, all. Excuse me. R.T. Videsi Miraj, Deputy Permanent Secretary, Ministry of Planning and Development.
Good afternoon. Candice Ramsaran, Acting Director, Town and Country Planning Division.
Good afternoon. Kishan Kumar Singh, Head Multilateral Environmental Agreements Unit.
Thank you. Can I ask the Ministry of Works and Transport team?
Good afternoon, Chair and members. Sonia Francis Yearwood, Ministry of Works and Transport, Permanent Secretary.
Good afternoon. Mohammed Baksh, Acting Chief Engineer, Drainage Division, Ministry of Works and Transport.
Hi, I'm Gadif, Francil Mendes, Civil Engineer 1, Ministry of Works and Transport, Drainage Division.
Thank you. Ministry of Rural Development and Local Government.
Good afternoon. I'm Jerry David. I'm the Senior Disaster Management Coordinator at the Ministry of Rural Development and Local Government.
Good afternoon. I am Kathy Christopher,
Disaster Management Coordinator assigned to the Diego Martin Borough Corporation.
We have, of course, the Ministry of Agriculture, Land and Fisheries.
Good afternoon, Chair and members. I am Farouk Hussain, the Permanent Secretary at the Ministry of Agriculture, Land and Fisheries.
Good afternoon, Chair and members. I am David Ram. I'm the Acting Director of the Regional Administration South Division of the Ministry of Agriculture, Land and Fisheries.
Good afternoon, Chair and members. I am Michelle Shah, Deputy Director of the Engineering Division at the Ministry of Agriculture, Land and Fisheries.
Good afternoon, Chair and members of the committee. I am Nigel Grimes, Project Coordinator, Ministry of Agriculture, Land and Fisheries.
Officials from the Office of Disaster Preparedness and Management.
Good afternoon, Chair and members. Major General Rodney Smart, CEO of the ODPM.
Thank you. And I believe we have the Tobago Emergency Management Agency.
Chair, if I may, I have some other colleagues with me.
Oh, sorry.
Thank you very much.
Good afternoon, Lieutenant Commander Kirk Jean-Baptiste, Training and Education Specialist, ODPM.
Good afternoon, all. My name is Shana Khan. I'm a Regional Coordinator at the ODPM.
Good afternoon. My name is Camille Galston, Hazard Mitigation Specialist at the Office of Disaster Preparedness and Management.
Thank you. And we have the members of the Tobago Emergency Management Agency who are joining us virtually.
Good afternoon, distinguished ladies and gentlemen. The name is Alan Stewart, the Director of the Tobago Emergency Management Agency. Mr. Chair, allow my other partner to introduce herself.
All right, thank you very much. Good afternoon, Chair. Good afternoon, members. Maloric Beckel, Contingency Planning Officer, TIMA.
Thank you. Thank you. So again, welcome to all officials of the various ministries and agencies. And at this point, I would just want to invite the various heads of agencies to make a brief opening statement to set the context of this meeting. So in this regard, I would want to invite the Permanent Secretary of the Ministry of Planning and Development to make a brief opening statement.
Good afternoon again, Chair and members of the Public Administration and Appropriation Committee, as well as the viewing public. The Ministry of Planning and Development extends its thanks to you for the invitation to attend this very important inquiry into flood mitigation in Trinidad and Tobago, aligned with Sustainable Development Goal 11. The MPD continues to advocate for flood mitigation through the National Development Strategy 2016 to 2030, known as Vision 2030. The National Development Strategy provides the overarching policy framework for all stakeholders responsible for achieving national priorities and policies. Sustainable Development Goal 11, titled Sustainable Cities and Communities, recognizes the urgent need to reduce the risk of disasters by lowering the exposure and vulnerability to disasters, or by building resilient infrastructure. The NPD continues to provide support and policy guidance as it relates to flood mitigation through the following divisions. The Project Planning and Reconstruction Division, which is responsible for the overall management of the public sector investment program. Through the PPRD, the ministry's role includes the review and analysis of project proposals for funding, efficient allocation of financial resources for projects and programs aimed at addressing flood mitigation, and monitoring the progress of these projects and programs. The Town and Country Planning Division, which uses an inclusive approach to spatial planning and seeks to address issues relating to economic, social, and environmental matters in an integrated manner under the National Spatial Development Strategy. The Town and Country maintains a land use policy and site development standards to mitigate the possible impacts arising from built development in flood-prone areas. The Town and Country Planning Division also plays a regulatory role in guiding development with respect to planning permission applications. We also have the Environmental Policy and Planning Division, which plays a role in developing and implementing initiatives geared toward flood alleviation caused by the onset of increasing impacts of climate change. In addition, the ministry, again, through Town and Country Planning Division, works with several other regulatory agencies, such as the Ministry of Works and Transport, the Office of Disaster Preparedness and Management, the various corporations within the Ministry of Rural Development and Local Government, the Ministry of Agriculture, Land and Fisheries, the EMA, each of which has a responsibility and a part to play in ensuring that we protect the environment as much as we can from impacts such as floods. So the ministry continues to work towards SDG 11 as several spatial planning guidelines on climate change, flood mitigation, and green building design have been drafted, but not yet finalized. In closing, the ministry remains committed to working with all relevant stakeholders in taking all the necessary steps and adopting the essential strategies toward flood mitigation across Trinidad and Tobago. This collaborative approach will ensure that targets set out in the Vision 2030 and the SDGs, specifically Goal 11, are achieved. Thank you kindly.
Thank you. Thank you, PS Hines. May I now invite PS Francis Seawood to make a brief opening statement?
Once again, good afternoon, Chairman, members of the Public Administration and Appropriation Committee, and members of the various stakeholder groups present and the listening viewers. The Ministry of Works and Transport wishes to thank the committee for its invitation to attend today's meeting to discuss flood mitigation in Trinidad and Tobago. We also wish to thank the Ministry of Planning and Development for their overarching statement, which was just provided, within which we work in the main. Chairman, the Ministry of Works and Transport has developed programs and projects to assist in the alleviation of flooding, and we remain committed to continuing our efforts in the mitigation of flooding across the country. My team and I are willing to respond to any questions to the best of our ability and welcome any recommendations that are preferred by you and other committee members. I thank you.
Thank you. Might I invite PS Hussein to make a brief opening statement? Ministry of Rural Development. Sorry, Agriculture, Lands and Fisheries.
Good afternoon, Chair, members of the committee, ladies and gentlemen. The Ministry of Agriculture, Land and Fisheries welcomes the opportunity to appear before this committee and to contribute to the discussions on flood mitigation as it relates to the agriculture sector. The ministry provides infrastructural and extension services to farmers and is involved in water management, flood control, and mitigation in food producing areas. The ministry also supports farmers through our agricultural incentive programs in the use of appropriate management practices and land preparation activities that can contribute to reducing flooding. Additionally, the ministry also supports the farming community through the flood relief program. Chair, the ministry remains committed to working with our colleagues and development partners in a cohesive and proactive approach towards alleviating the incidence of flooding in our farming community. Thank you.
Thank you. Can I invite Mr. David of the Ministry of Rural Development and Local Government?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. The Ministry of Rural Development and Local Government, thank you for this invitation. We think it's appropriate at this time. Flood mitigation is intricately linked to Sustainable Development Goal 11, Sustainable Cities and Communities. SDG 11 strives to make cities and human settlements inclusive, safe, resilient, and sustainable, with a key emphasis on human settlements. One specific target within SDG 11 is Target 11.5, which directs efforts towards reducing the impact of disasters, including floods, on urban areas. The target sets a goal to significantly reduce the number of deaths and the number of people affected and substantially decrease the direct economic losses relative to global gross domestic product caused by disasters, including water-related disasters, by 2030. The target places particular attention on safeguarding the poor and individuals in vulnerable communities. The achievement of this target necessitates the implementation of disaster risk reduction measures, including flood mitigation strategies in both urban and vulnerable areas. These measures are designed to enhance resilience and minimize the adverse effects of floods on communities, infrastructure, and the economy. The Ministry of Rural Development and Local Government has been actively engaged in this process through its 14 disaster management units. A primary approach involves advocacy by the disaster management unit. The focus of the advocacy is to promote 1, floodplain zoning and land use planning. Each year, the disaster management unit has generated an updated hazard map, providing valuable insights for the Council's awareness and proactive measures. Construction of flood barriers and levees, evaluating structures, stormwater management, creation of and restoration of wetlands. These are some. Improving drainage systems. The ministry, under the guidance of the Minister of Rural Development and Local Government, has been actively enhancing its capacity to support regional corporations in improving their efficiency for clearing watercourses within their respective jurisdiction. To facilitate this initiative, the ministry, for the first time, and that is the Ministry of Rural Development and Local Government, has procured 2 backhoes and 1 excavator truck. The backhoe acquired last year has already provided valuable service to areas in San Fernando, Diego Martin, Pinal Davis, San Juan, Laventil, Port of Spain, Cuba, Tabique, Talparo. Currently, the excavator is at Palo Seco, where the truck and the other backhoe is to be located. This strategic positioning of equipment is aimed at aiding both mitigation, flood mitigation efforts, and also rapid response to address potential challenges. 500 hours have already been spent with this backhoe. I cannot give you, we are not able to give you details yet. 500 hours is just too short. But as we acquire more equipment and we assist corporations, we are intent on collecting data of the impact of what we do. Public education, another part of flood mitigation, because people need to know where the impact is. The Ministry of Rural Development and Local Government, with the support of the ODPM, the United States Agency for International Development, that is the Bureau of Humanitarian Assistance, and through the Regional Disaster Assistance Program, RDP will be hosting its first CERT Train the Trainer program. For years, it has been myself and 2 others. We got funding through USAID to train 50 instructors.
Thank you very much, Mr. David. I'm sure that the members will have some further questions.
Thank you.
If I may at this point invite Major General retired Rodney Smart to give a brief opening statement, sir.
Thank you very much, Chair. On behalf of the ODPM, allow me first to thank you and the committee members for your kind invitation for us to participate in these deliberations. The ODPM, or the Office of Disaster Preparedness and Management, is a division of the Ministry of National Security and as the National Strategic Disaster Management Office. It is responsible for coordinating all aspects of the disaster management cycle: prevention, mitigation, preparedness, response, and recovery, all at the national level. It is therefore a distinct entity from the disaster management units of the 14 regional corporations under the Ministry of Rural Development and Local Government, as well as different from the Tobago Emergency Management Agency under the Tobago House of Assembly. The ODPM therefore provides support to these local level offices, but its main focus is on national requirements, and therefore it takes a comprehensive approach to disaster risk reduction and disaster risk management. The office is also the nation's focal point to the international and regional disaster management community, and therefore one of its other roles is to ensure the nation is compliant with the requirements of the various frameworks. These frameworks include, but are not limited to, CARICOM's Comprehensive Disaster Management Strategy and the Sendai Framework for Disaster Risk Reduction. It is also Trinidad and Tobago's focal point for CARICOM's southern subregion, which includes Grenada, Guyana, and Suriname. To ensure these frameworks are mainstreamed into all sectors of society, with Cabinet's approval, the ODPM established the National Disaster Prevention and Preparedness Multi-Sectoral Committee. This strategic vehicle comprises ministries and agencies, the private sector, and civil society organizations, all working together to strengthen Trinidad and Tobago's disaster readiness and resilience to severe disaster events. I thank you most kindly, Chair.
Thank you very much, CEO. And can we now move to Tobago and invite Mr. Alan Stewart, the Director of TEMA, to make a brief opening statement.
Once again, colleagues, good afternoon, distinguished members. The Tobago Emergency Management Agency, through its establishment on the 9th of March, 1998, it was well pointed out by my colleague at ODPM that it was set out by the Tobago House of Assembly. This was established by Executive Minute number 64, the 9th of March, 1998. Tobago, I must say, has a wealth of natural resources that support our livelihoods, our development and growth. These resources provide valuable ecosystem services that aid in the protecting of our island and its natural, cultural, and built resources. These ecosystem services also aid in the protecting of our greatest asset, our human resource, our people. However, ladies and gentlemen in this room, virtual room as well, we must agree that when we look at what is happening in regards to climate change and its direct and cascading impact, the ability to slow and also to undo our development progress is very much real. Moreover, the island is exposed to a range of hazards. So while here we are centered and speaking about flooding, we have recognized that those same hydrometeorological events, the impact they would have had on our island based on a broader scale, landslides, fallen trees, the impact on slope instability and things like that. It's important for us to recognize that over the years, Tobago has undertaken a range of initiatives that steer the island on a trajectory to enhance capacities for resilience. This disaster reduction and resilience strategy and action plan that we would have embarked on about 2 years ago further support the island's effort to reduce disaster risks as it relates to flooding and other hazards related to hydrometeorological events and promote climate change adaptation going along with sustainable development. As a result, we have seen Tobago coming out with a vision to see a transformed Tobago that is resilient, adaptable, inclusive, and people-centered island. where we sustainably manage and leverage our scarce resources with strong governance arrangement to reduce disaster risk. And I'm quite certain as we go along, we'll be able to expand on some of those actions as we go along during this discussion. Again, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for this very important session where we can, discuss some of these issues and along with the challenges. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Stewart. So officials, I just wanted to start with putting the whole problem, the whole issue of this flooding in context, because as you know, the public, I'm sure would be very keen to try to understand, what measures are in place for flood mitigation, especially going back to the flooding of 2016, 17, 18, and 19, and looking in the interim, the gap where we've been fortunate so far in the last couple of years, what steps have been taken. So my first question, and I want to direct this to you, P.S. Hines, is there any study that has been done or is currently in progress to assess the economic impact, the health impact, the social impact, or the impacts of the flooding in Trinidad and Tobago? In other words, can you tell us what is the scale of the problem that we're trying to deal with as we go forward?
What I can say is that the ministry, through its PSIP, by giving funding, has supported the Ministry of Works, who is about to engage and probably is already engaging on a particular program. I am not going to be that specific as to the nature of the studies that they would have engaged in as part of this program, but I better defer to the specifics of that to the Ministry of Works and Transport.
Good afternoon again, everyone. I believe that the matter that P.S. Hines would have referenced is the strategic drainage plan that the ministry is embarking on. That plan has within it both infrastructure measures as well as institutional measures, inclusive of studies. And as part of that plan, yes, those studies are to be undertaken.
I'm sorry, I was trying to, for the education of the committee and the public, just to find out if we have an idea, for example, what impact it would have had if we know, for example, on GDP, economic costs. Has there been any studies recently? I'm not sure if
I can't respond to that immediately right now. It's something that we could look into to compile so that I'm not leading the committee astray. But you are quite right. There would have been some investigations. I'm remembering particularly the flood of 2016, yes? And a lot of mapping and that in kind of work would have been done. But I can't tell you off the top of my head what would have been the socioeconomic impact. There were quite a few newspaper articles on it as well. So I will have to defer just for now on that.
Sure, thank you. So officials, I just, again, to put this in context, and we'll come into some more detailed questions later on. But I just want to quote here from a paper which was presented at a Congress in 2010. It's ISOCAP, Congress 2010. ISOCAP stands for the International Society of City and Regional Planners, which I'm sure some of you may be familiar with. And this is a paper which was presented in 2010, and I'm going back to this paper because we're now in 2023, and therefore it would be important to know where we've progressed and from what is written here. And on page 9 of this paper, it states that at present there is no policy which explicitly addresses disaster management, nor clearly states or identifies any agency as having the sole responsibility for disaster management in Trinidad. So this paper is entitled Flood Management, an Examination of Mitigation Measures for Flooding in Urban Areas. This is a paper I'm quoting from. So it says, instead, the legislative and institutional arrangements are broken up amongst different state agencies, ministries, and as a result, flooding is addressed in a piecemeal approach. And the paper goes on to quote existing policies and legislation governing disaster management in Trinidad and Tobago. I will not go into the various details, but essentially, the paper is saying that with several pieces of legislation governing the flood management process, there are conflicting and overlapping responsibilities which contribute to confusion, neglect of duties, lack of coordination, and unclear responsibilities. So this speaks to a question that is often in the minds of the public whenever disasters occur. So I don't know if I can invite you, P.S. Hines, to address where we are, whether that situation is still true as we speak in 2023.
Chair, that's a very heavy and weighty statement that has been made there. What I can tell you is yes, the responsibility does seem to be divided among several agencies. That is in fact the truth. In January of 2020 or 2021, I think it's before COVID hit, there was an appreciation of that. There was an understanding of that. And the Ministry of Planning and Development took upon itself a role to endeavor to pull all of its stakeholders together that will have any sort of responsibility to do with flood mitigation and flood management, to begin to discuss the way forward. What kind of a plan could we come up with? What kind of recommendations that we could make? Unfortunately, that was hindered by COVID and some other challenges, and I know that sort of thing is going to come out in this meeting today. But there is a commitment on the table to continue that work. The Ministry of Works and the Ministry of Planning have been in conversation, and we hope to jointly pull together our colleagues to begin to discuss where do we go from here. We acknowledge that many agencies have a little piece to play, but we are not satisfied with that, and we want to be able to come up with coordinated policy and some recommendations. Planning may be the one that would eventually take the note, but we do understand that our sister arm in terms of implementation is not just the Ministry of Works, it will be rural government, it's all the people you have here. But we are not going to shirk that responsibility.
Thank you, Madam PS. If I can just ask Major General Rodney Smart to give his perspective in terms of the ODPM with regards to this issue.
Thank you very much, Chair. Leveraging what P.S. Hines just indicated, the paper that spoke to the paper that you referenced, I think probably the writer didn't have all the information at the time, because Cabinet would have established through the ODPM a comprehensive disaster management policy in 2011. And while it didn't specifically speak to flooding, it took a multi-hazard approach. The ODPM would have taken a look at it, taken into consideration the new challenge we would have faced by the pandemic, and we would have reviewed that policy. And in fact, at this present time, we are working with the Ministry of Planning and Development now to integrate the climate change challenges that we now have alongside the disaster risk management challenges. So we are about to do a study, a risk reduction study that looks at the cohesiveness between disaster risk reduction as well as climate change. And that certainly will inform the revision of the national policy. So there is a policy that speaks to the multi-hazard approach. And one of the risks we'll be looking at with the Ministry of Planning and Development, and of course all other ministries, is the whole idea of flooding in Trinidad and Tobago.
Thank you. So before I open up the discussion to other members of the committee, I just wanted to go back to the Ministry of Planning and Development, Madam PS, and to ask, now it's stating in your submission that one of the roles of the ministry in flood mitigation is to allocate financial resources efficiently for projects and programs. Can you confirm that these financial resources have been provided to stakeholders in a timely manner?
So how the process works is that when draft estimates are prepared, ministries, divisions, departments, agencies submit their requests. And through a process of review of their proposals to see if it's appropriate and if they can truly implement and if everything is in place, a decision is made to recommend a certain amount of funding. That's the part that the Ministry of Planning plays. That submission just then goes to the Ministry of Finance. And at the end of the day, the actual allocation that is given to any particular ministry, department, or agency is determined by the Ministry of Finance. So I can say without a shadow of a doubt that allocation has gone to various ministries. I mean, I would remember off the top of my head what the Ministry of Works may have gotten, but they can speak more clearly to that. So yes, funding has been made available. The issue may be, though, one of releases. There is a time frame and there are conditions under which releases are given to the ministries in order for them to implement. So the allocation may be there, but from time to time, there may be challenges with the actual releases for them to be able to implement their specific projects and programs, but the intent is there in terms of providing the resources.
Understood. Thank you, PS. So in that regard, if I can just open it up and ask the other entities present here today, if there are any projects or programs that have been stalled or halted as a result of untimely release of funding. Well, in this case, it will be from the Ministry of Finance, as you indicated. Any takers? All right. All right. So perhaps we can come back to that. Perhaps we can. So perhaps we can come back to that later on. But just to be specific, Madam PS Hines, if I can refer to your Appendix 1, which speaks to the allocations for the drainage and irrigation program under the Ministry of Rural Development and Local Government. Perhaps either you or local government head can indicate whether those allocations have been released. We're speaking to that table there for the sum of 81,500,000, and I believe this is for the construction of drains and so on, box drains and so on.
Mr. Chairman, I'm not in a position to answer that question in terms of the releases at this time. What I can say, however, is that there are always allocations. Always. The question is always, is it released? And I have a little joke I make. I think that allocations, I call it monopoly money. And only when it is released, then you say we have real money. So it's always a challenge for release. And I know that the state tries its best, but I cannot give you an answer for this question. And I can probably get it for you and have it in writing, provide it to you.
Yeah, that would be okay. That would be accepted to the committee. I just wanted to move on to Appendix 2 of that same submission from the Ministry of Planning and Development with regards to the projects being implemented by the Ministry of Works and Transport. And perhaps I could invite PS Francis here to give us an update, because we have several projects here with regards to flood mitigation, erosion control program, and so on. But the status is just is given at September 30th, 2023. Madam PS, with regards to those projects in Appendix 2, are you in a position to give us any further updates with regards to these projects at this time?
Mr. Chairman, we can submit in writing details of the projects, because I'm seeing them now.
Yeah.
From Ministry of Planning and Development. These are all ongoing projects within the ministry. I can say that we have had advancements in most of them. If there's a specific one that you would like to identify, and I can see if I can update it for you.
All right. Thank you, Madam PS. we'll take up the offer for submission in writing as an update on these projects.
Not a problem.
At this point, I'd like to open it up to members of the committee. Member Mark?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, hi. May I ask again whether you think the time has come, given our recent experiences between 16 and 19, 2016 to 2019. And as the chairman was advising us earlier, we have been spared. Almighty God has spared us to some extent between 20 to now without having any major disaster of any significant magnitude. And then when you take into account our recent experiences, along with the intensity or intensification of climate change and global sea warming, we are heading for more challenges on the environmental front in countries like ours. So I wanted to ask you whether you would have any objection to our committee considering a recommendation for a unified body that would be responsible for overall disaster management, as well as flood mitigation, among others, and put legislative meat to that framework so that we can, from here on in, have a more united approach to overall disaster management and flood reduction in TNT. Would you have any objection, ma'am, to that approach?
No objection to that approach at all, member. What I am thinking of is that I know that you would not make a recommendation without including the various levels of considerations that must go into that recommendation. For instance, you will get reports such as another entity again, another corporation, another thing again, because such entities are not always successful. But I'm hearing what you're saying, particularly about the legislation. And reviews in the past has revealed that in the absence of, we've seen successes in other jurisdictions when there was very clear legislation. And in the absence of that, I can appreciate you putting forward the possibility of that recommendation assisting us. You heard the contribution from the ODPM. And again, it may not be that difficult because of the mandate that they have. It may just be a case of expanding or being a bit more specific in terms of responsibilities to coordinate certain things. So it's not that far-fetched. It's not necessarily that you have to recommend a new thing, but I like the way that you're going. I thought, though, that you were going to ask as well about specific interventions in the light of the increased intensity because of climate change, because I wanted to volunteer Mr. Kumar Singh, my colleague, who would share about a specific project that's happening now in Oropouche, where we are trying to come up with a model, a way of implementing green and grey measures to address the flooding. So if you would like to hear a bit more about that as you continue to conceptualize and think about approaches, I think now would be a good time.
Yes.
Sure, thank you. Please. Thank you very much, Chair. So maybe I should preface my substantive response by indicating the approach taken to look at flooding in light of climate change impacts and adaptation in particular. And so the policy approach has been to assess climate risks and to integrate climate risks into the sectoral and national development process. The objective is to, over a short period of time, to short to midterm, when you assess these risks, to formulate intervention options, implement them, monitor and evaluate and revisit through an iterative approach. And the idea is to build climate resiliency going forward. And that will include all of the impacts of climate change, including flooding in particular, because the models have projected since 20 years ago that we are now seeing that precipitation intensity or rainfall intensity is going to increase. In other words, as the temperatures warm, you have more evaporation. So the more water that goes up, the more will come down. And the more water will come down in less time. So it means that the drainage capacity and everything that copes with that volume of water have to be managed. So in the specific context of flooding, the specific project that P.S. Hines alluded to is one in the South Orpuch River Basin, which we recognize as having perennial flooding problems, but not merely to alleviate flooding per se, but to build climate resiliency overall. So we're looking at the impacts on farmers, for example, on communities, and building capacities within the regional corporation to assess those climate risks and to make that kind of intervention at the jurisdictional level. And we hope that that would be a pilot project that would hopefully be expanded to other regional corporations, so that that climate resiliency is built throughout the national development fabric, and through an iterative pathways approach, if I could call it that, to adaptation and climate risk management over time. Flood management and as well other climate impacts can be properly managed and planned for through that iterative process. So the South Orpuch River Basin, or the SORB project as we call it, will seek to look at flood mitigation measures, for example, to look at building climate resiliency among farmers, to look at best practices across the board, across sectors, so that resiliency, that climate resiliency to mitigate flood as the flooding risks exist now, and also as the projections using various models for precipitation as they become available can be planned for. Thank you very much.
Before I revert back to you, Member Mark, Mr. Kwarsing, if I can just confirm that you're speaking about the multi-sectoral adaptation measures to climate change in the South Orpuch River Basin project, which I believe is a $10 million project. Now, I believe that there was some launch in the community a few months ago. Can you update us on that and any progress going forward?
Yes, thank you. It's the funding has come from the UN Adaptation Fund, $10 million US. And you're correct, the launch did take place last year, late last year in the area. And thus far, the project has seen good progress. Various meetings have been held, particularly with the Pinal Debe Regional Corporation, to get them involved and to get them intricately involved in the execution of the project. The project is being executed by the University of the West Indies because, as you would imagine, various technical inputs would have to go into the project rollout, and the university has been studying that area for some time. And so they have a lot of data and they're well positioned to do that. So this year is expected to see some progress, or some more progress rather, in terms of developing the flood risk maps, consultations with the regional corporations under which the area falls, because it's broad, it's a huge area, and the execution would then see the various components of the project and the various outputs and deliverables begin to take shape.
Is there a time frame for completion of this project, or is it ongoing?
it's ongoing, but the time frame is 3 years.
May I ask the director, I think, from the OPM, yeah, I would like to ask Major General. You mentioned earlier that the cabinet had approved a comprehensive policy, which you describe as a very strategic initiative, which would bring together a number of stakeholders to address this whole issue of management, disaster management, and flood reduction or mitigation. Could you elaborate for us on the composition of this particular body in terms of the stakeholders? How long this policy has been established and implemented? And do you have any concrete outcomes to report to this committee on the efficacy of this policy in either preparing for disaster or flood mitigation in TNT? Can you share with us your experience in that area?
Thank you very much for the question, member. I would want to just go back to the policy I spoke about. The actual name is the Comprehensive Disaster Management Framework. And the intent of that was to begin a process of bringing agencies together. And one of the outcomes of that policy, and it is tied to the approach countries are taking with regard to disaster risk reduction and management, is to have this whole of society approach. And earlier on, I would have mentioned the National Disaster Prevention and Preparedness Multi-Sectoral Committee. That committee was established in 2020 by the cabinet, just after the start of the pandemic. And it comprises all the ministries, divisions, and agencies. So the agencies who are the ministries and agencies here today are all part of it, as well as recently we would have included the private sector. There's a private sector representative, and as well as civil society organization representative. And the whole idea is to take this comprehensive approach. One of the initiatives that this committee takes, and I just want to just go back a bit to your structuring. In fact, it speaks to the structuring you mentioned there, member. Structuring disaster management in Trinidad and Tobago, because that is the purpose of it. It is to take this whole of society approach and as far as possible involve all the major components. And therefore, based on what I just said, it tells you that the sectors are involved, the national sectors are involved, but also the Ministry of Rural Development and Local Government and TIMA in Tobago, they are involved. So it goes down to the community level as well. So we have a structure in place. And one of the projects that this committee has done over the past 3 years, and soon we'll be doing again, is what we were able to get cabinet to agree to, and it's called the National Disaster Prevention Preparedness Month. And this is in May. And May was strategically chosen because it comes ahead of the hurricane season, which begins in June. But this committee is doing work throughout the year, but it's just to ensure that we bring national focus to the start of the hurricane season, because we recognize that is the period where Trinidad and Tobago has the greatest disaster loss. And therefore, for the past 3 years, we've been having a series of activities involving all the agencies throughout Trinidad, and I said Trinidad and Tobago. So Timor is also involved. So quite a lot has been happening. One of the recent outputs of this committee is a national critical infrastructure study, and the agencies were all part of the study. And I also mentioned a national disaster and climate risk assessment, which should start this year once we get the funding. We're looking for funding from the Caribbean Development Bank through the Ministry of Planning and Development. And once we are able to get that study, all the agencies as well, because they are sector representatives, they will be part of that study. So quite a few things are happening. Remember, I'll mention one final one. We just started a National Adaptation Plan review. The Ministry of Planning and Development is responsible for the National Adaptation Plan. And 2 weeks ago, we began working with them to strengthen the National Adaptation Plan. So we take into consideration the things you mentioned, climate change, as well as disaster risk reduction. Thank you.
Yeah. If I may also ask, I know that one of your responsibilities or functions is on your own submission on page 4. You talked about the ODPM contributing to strengthening national early warning systems. Would you care to elaborate on that first?
Thank you for the question, member. And I would like to involve the rest of my team. So if I can ask Ms. Khan, who's sitting next to me, to speak about some of the projects that her unit is doing in that regard. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, CEO, for that question. And thank you, members. So some of the projects that we would have done with regards to early warning would be our community flood early warning systems, which we would have done in partnership with the Ministry of Rural Development and Local Government, as well as the Ministry of Planning and the Water Resources Agency. And this would involve, the additional river gauges within some of our rivers and streams in Trinidad and Tobago. And this would assist us in getting flood data a lot faster, as the river level data a lot faster, so that we can alert our public. One other system that we have is our PANS, or Public Alert Notification System, which was just recently tested. And this allows us to send out blast messages to subscribers throughout Trinidad and Tobago. Once they are on our system, they are getting alerts. So this adds to our early warning for the country. Thank you.
Mr. Chair, if you'd give me some indulge me a bit on this flood early warning system, because it started at the Ministry of Rural Development and Local Government. That's where it began. And to enhance it even further, we are seeking to put cameras on all the stream flow station. That is 100 cameras, so that we will have the ability to live stream now what is happening in communities. So individuals will not only have the information that is developed from our ministry, what the media uses, what the ODPM uses, what Met Office uses, is what is produced from the communications department of the Ministry of Rural Development and Local Government that gives a dashboard stating the river levels. But in addition to that, we are looking at putting cameras. We had some challenges with the budget department last years, but we have moved on in that we are now engaging another U.S. United Nations agency who are giving us some assurance, but you know how that goes, that they will assist us with the cameras. I think this is important. Trinidad is a small place. We will be able to see what is happening so that it will aid in search and rescue. We had problems in Bamboo because we didn't have eyes when that water level was so high. Now that we can put cameras and stream live, we will see and be able to rescue more efficiently.
So David, Member Mark, sorry,
yeah.
just one
Okay,
before I revert to you. Ms. Khan, with regards to the PANS, the National Public the National Public Alert Notification System, you said for those who are on your system, what does that mean?
So right now, Mr. Chair, the system persons would have to subscribe. We do have a number of ways that persons can subscribe to the system. And once they are on it, we have been promoting it widely via social media and our public outreach platforms. Persons are allowed to sign up and they can get notifications, whether it is specific to their region that they want, or as well for the entire Trinidad and Tobago region.
Is there a cost attached to this signing up?
No, so it's absolutely free to the public for signing up.
I'm just thinking, in terms of preparation for a national disaster, many members of the public may not be aware that you have to actually sign up to this. Does it allow you to just send text messages to everybody who has a cell phone, or is that not feasible?
Chair, if I may. So the intent is for everybody in Trinidad and Tobago to sign up. And we have been blasting it on social media. We've also done it primetime news. We've placed it in the newspaper. So the intent is for everyone. But the legislation now doesn't allow us to enforce it. So we've been working with the Telecom Authority of Trinidad and Tobago with a view to seeing if we can do it through self-broadcasting. So far, the discussions are very progressive. But right now, as it stands, we are making appeals throughout Trinidad and Tobago. Recently, there was the challenge where we had the hillside on the way to Maracas Bay a few weeks ago. The correct name is hillside, but Trinidadians and Tobagoans will call it the landslide. And we would have sent out through the Ministry of Rural Development and Local Government and Works, we would have sent out a message. And as a result of sending out the message to Trinidadians and Tobagonians, we recognize an uptick in terms of people signing up for the program. And this is one of the challenges worldwide. People seem to procrastinate until there's a disaster or when something is anticipated. So we are driving, we continue to spend money, making sure that we are on the airwaves. And the intent is to get everyone in Trinidad and Tobago to sign up. We have been given good support from the networks, and I want to say publicly to the networks, thank you for their support. And from that perspective, hopefully we'll have every single phone in Trinidad and Tobago on the PANS alert system.
Can you indicate at this point in time what kind of numbers you have signed up?
Right now, we've crossed 8,000 persons.
It's a little bit worrisome because you would think that,
more persons would pick it up.
That's the number of people who would go to Maracas on that particular day, just never mind where else. So what steps you think?
Obviously, it would appear that your public education program is not effective in that regard. Do you have any intention, any plans to what you can do differently?
Certainly. So I would have mentioned that the intent is to work with the Telecom Authority of Trinidad and Tobago, because there is a way that it is done internationally. And you would have had experience going overseas. The intent is to do that, but we have to work through the Telecom Authority as well as through the networks. We've had meetings with both networks as well as with the Telecom Authority. And they have indicated that they would need to do some additional things on their network. But there's a process we're going through. in terms of the public the public education approach, we have blasted everything known, Twitter, X, Instagram, you name it, we have done it. And we will continue to. But as I said, when you look through the theory of disaster management and communications, what we experience in Trinidad and Tobago is not unusual to societies. It is when, societies often, when something happens, there will always be an uptake. But the ODPM will keep driving, we will keep investing money in making sure the public is aware. I will also share with you that we do outreaches with the Ministry of Rural Development and Local Government. And at all these outreaches, we are out there signing up residents so that they can get onto the system. But it is one of those things you have to work through. You have to be patient. You have to keep driving. You have to keep all the time through the school children as well. We do that so that they could go home and inform their parents, everything we do. But as I said, we will keep driving this process. It was launched in April last year. We will do it again during the National Disaster Prevention Preparedness Month, which is coming up. So from the ODPM, as well as all our other agencies, we are driving that communication.
Thank you. I'm thinking some outreach in the malls, for example, with a little incentive, how Trinidadians operate, but we can come back to that. Member Mark.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I want to make it very clear. Lives are at stake. The next disaster that may visit here would result in people dying because of how changes are occurring. And I am getting from the utterances and the submission so far that you will try, you will do this, you will do that. And there doesn't appear to me, Mr. Chairman, to be an urgency of the moment or the imperative of the period that we are existing in. And it only reinforces the absolute need for legislative coordination and for the unification of a common legislative framework in this country. I listened to Mr. Jerry David. He's going to put up cameras so that when the flood level, and then you have Major General. He has a comprehensive policy, and he's reaching out to people to sign on. So there is absolutely an absence of coordination. And the point I'm making, people are not, nature is not waiting for us to unite, This is an urgency that we are faced with. And it tells me, Mr. Chairman, that we have to sit with this team that is here and come up with a legislative framework to put to the Parliament to demonstrate the urgency of a unified approach to disaster management and flood reduction in Trinidad and Tobago. And at this point, Mr. Chairman, I think it's very useful to invite Mr. Alan Stewart out of Tobago, because Tobago is ahead of Trinidad and Tobago. Is ahead of Trinidad, I should say, as far as I'm concerned, in their level of coordination, in their unification, in their single purpose. I think what Tobago is lacking, Mr. Chairman, is maybe legislative authority to give effect to what they have been doing. So I believe that the time has come at this moment, Mr. Chairman, if we could invite Mr. Alan Stewart out of Tobago to share TEMA's experiences with disaster management and flood reduction and what they have been doing and how, for instance, we can further help or they can further guide us in Trinidad and Tobago to strengthen coordination, monitoring, evaluating, and at the end of the day and so on, coming up with a single unified legislative framework for overall disaster management and reduction as it relates to flooding.
Chair, if I can ask kindly, after Tobago speaks, if we can speak about what is happening in terms of legislation for the benefit of the member.
Sure, thank you. So if I can invite Mr. Stewart.
Good afternoon, colleagues, once again, and I'm very much enthused by the challenges that we are seeking to resolve because they are very important. So I'm sitting here, and I am while I understand that my responsibilities is towards the island of Tobago, but very much I am very moved and concerned about what is happening nationally because I understand clearly where we need to be as a nation going forward as it relates, and Senator Mark would have made certain expressions which are very relevant, but at the same time, I think what is needed is a thorough picture as to what exists, because some of the very things that inform our aspirations speaks to what we consider to be alignment to national frameworks, regional frameworks, and international frameworks. Our purpose, a little was said about structure, speaks to that as well. But I will also not just harp on the items that we have done or we are doing, which speaks to 4 major pillars coming out of the MCR, what is the Making Cities Resilient. To me, it is critically important understanding what is happening globally and what adaptation encourages, the idea of adaptation and what exactly it means on the ground. It means that there is something that is happening nationally that is not moving fast enough. What has helped to be able to gallop in such a manner is the office and where it is placed. Strategically, if you notice, I asked the question very widely. If the Minister of National Security get up in the morning, what do you think is foremost on his mind? Somebody answered and said crime. Now, when you look at the structure of disaster management in the country, it aligns itself with a number of other ministries and battling for space and resources from the same pie. That is one of the issues. So the unification is quite well. But it works in Tobago because we function out of the office of the Chief Secretary, and our lines of communications are not difficult in terms of how we move along. So when I speak about the Making Cities Resilient, it was very easy to bring this project from the UN into the Tobago space because of that management and governance structure that enables the TEMA to function in a particular way. In detail, we talk about 6 strategic goals. Those strategic goals are underpinned by 11 significant principles, strategic principles that pushes the disaster management concept. Through this Making Cities Resilient, we have looked at 91 strategic action plans that involves almost a number of sectors across the Tobago society. And even while TEMA is sitting here and not other members, we understand what is happening in other divisions within the Tobago House of Assembly. Just a few hours ago, we completed our Tobago Disaster Management Committee meeting because we are moving as a sector together with the varying sectors moving together. Are there challenges? Yes, there are challenges. And I want to use this forum to highlight a couple of those. Because, I mean, some people are very uncomfortable talking about the challenges. But in order for us to grow, these things need to be brought to the forefront and we can have them discussed. One of the major challenges that I hinted at in our last session like this, the legislation as it relates to procurement. A few years ago, we were sensing funding to be one of the major issues. Jerry said it a while ago that we talk about this type of money in terms of money being under allocations. The challenge we are having today is that while there are allocations available, you're having issues as it relates to what is released. And then what is released is being hindered strongly by a structure within the procurement legislation that just did not cater for disaster management and disaster risk. And therefore, I want to make that appeal that right now is a serious barrier and threat to even team up going forward, because we are trying to work with these tools and instruments of governance, and therefore it is impeding our progress. We are going through a period where we have an aging infrastructure, and therefore the replacement and the upkeep is quite critical. We talk about telecommunication and all of these matters, that what is happening with PANs. It requires an aggressive type of campaign in our spaces to bring people on board. Some of the things that we have done in the past are similar in terms of what PANs utilizes in terms of that notification process. It came out of an incident that happened in 2009, where you all may recall when that trooper truck overturned in Charlottesville, injuring a number of members of the Trinidad and Tobago Defense Force. Out of that, we saw the born of this notification process. It has worked well for us, but again, there are challenges in terms of how do you keep it going and what are the legislative agenda that allows it to become mandatory like other jurisdictions across the world, how they utilize it. So I think in closing, I want to mention this. It's imperative that we find the correct forum. While we have pinched a little bit on what are some of the issues here, I think definitely we need to create the right forum, the right platform, so we could have a national discussion on the challenges that we have faced and the galloping pace of climate, fossil fuel and its impact, and what is the expectation of the United Nations disaster risk reduction going forward. These are fair discussions while we are centered on, and I understand the necessity of flooding as it relates to flooding, but I see the comprehensive process as one system that we know definitely will work, because while we are talking flooding today, if a seismic event occurs, then we'll be talking earthquakes. So it needs to be very comprehensive and allow for it. I know these frameworks that we talk about, we spoke about the Vision 2030, the CIDEMA strategic and programming framework. We also talk about the Sendai framework, and also locally we have the disaster risk reduction. And these are some of the tools that we have in the country, but it's not supported by the right type of legislation, and therefore we need to visit that urgently to help us move along.
Thank you, Mr. Stewart, and we'll get back to you, especially with regards to the challenges you face with procurement and emergency situations. We can talk about that again. I know Major General Smart indicated he wanted to make a small contribution.
Sure. Yeah. Thank you very much, Chair. And I wanted to speak to the concern the member Mark spoke to. And so far, we didn't speak to legislation. So policy drives legislation. Legislation drives plans, plan drives activities. And I laid that out because I spoke to the policy that one was agreed to by Cabinet in 2011. I spoke about the revision of the policy to take into consideration the pandemic. And then I spoke to a risk assessment, which is going to be done, which is also going to inform the policy. So from that perspective, the act that directs disaster management is the Disaster Measures Act. And we have also revised that act. That act is in the process of revising. I would have mentioned the National Adaptation Plan that is also being revised to ensure that there are climate change concerns in the plan. That will impact as well the legislation that has been revised. And once those things are completed, we will have a new legislation. Member, you would have raised your concern about a comprehensive act. That is exactly what it does. It takes into consideration climate change. It takes into consideration the challenges that the societies are facing. And therefore, how are we as Trinidad and Tobago going to respond to that? So that I want to assure you is in work. But I don't want to walk away without just making the point that there are several initiatives I spoke about. I spoke about the national adaptation. I spoke about the assessment. I spoke about, well, my colleague spoke about the public alert notification. We also spoke to the community flood early warning system, as well as the month of activities. I don't want those things to go away because things are happening. And I just want to say that these agencies here, we recognize the challenges and we are taking initiatives to ensure that Trinidad and Tobago become more resilient. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Major. If I can invite Member Morris Julian to join the conversation.
Thank you very much, Chairman. Chairman, I've been listening and it's all very interesting, but I'm concerned that we're putting the cart before the horse because I think that with all the flooding questions that are coming up, we still have to go back to the Ministry of Planning and Development. And I have to ask certain questions, especially when it came to the Minister of Planning and Development spoke in Parliament, her response, I think I have it here, regarding the close water proximity to major watercourses. And the response was the ministry, through Town and Country Planning Division, has undertaken measures to regulate and monitor building practices in an effort to mitigate flooding within communities in collaboration with other advisory agencies. Sorry, no glasses and very old. So this hillside policy, it was stated that it would take place in January 2024. Can we get an update about that? Because at the end of the day, I think we all know there are persons who do not follow the law, will not follow the regulations. Simple drive through my constituency, you would see lovely homes right next to the riverbanks. You would see land illegally subdivided. I am from local government originally, so that's something that irritates me because then they ask for roads, drainage, lights. And I really want to know about the hillside policy and what is happening, what is the current progress, and I just have a couple minor questions related to that.
Thank you for that question, Member. I will then ask my Director of Town and Country to give an update. And if you will also allow her to share a bit about, I know you're from local government originally, so you do understand the enforcement process. But because the public is tuned in, I think they need to appreciate even the challenges there in fixing what we all know to be the problems. So, Ms. Ramsaran.
Thank you, Member. Through the chair, thank you for the question. And I recognize that the hillside development is one of concern. You also raised the issue of non-compliance, as well as built development in areas where built development should not take place.
Just to clarify, from what I understand, it's a policy that the hillside policy in particular is what I'm interested in. And of course, I need all the other information for our listening and viewing public.
Thank you for that clarification. We are working towards developing the guidelines because you cannot, the approach we are adopting in working on this document is one in which persons would be guided as to how to approach development. The Town and Country Planning Division would give regard to a development plan, which frames the policies, as well as the site development standards. Matters involving development on hillsides will require persons knowing how to approach it. We also are working internally to finalize these documents. Our public engagement is critical. We have a project which is geared towards engaging the public, engaging our critical and key stakeholders, some of whom are here today with us, in order to have that important input in any document guiding hillside development. That communication strategy is being finalized at this moment, and we are looking toward in the month of the second quarter in this year to have those stakeholder consultations begin to take place.
Just to ask a little further, so it won't be complete at the end of January, but definitely by the first quarter, which is great to hear. But I would like to know a little about what will happen to the developers. And I say developers, and I'm using quotation marks, right? Quote unquote developers. That currently, I'm saying currently, going on the Northern Range, for example, we know the impact. What is in place for now to deal with that particular aspect? Before I ask one more question. Don't worry, I don't have any local government questions. I'm just sticking to this.
Thank you, Member, and through the chair again. I note your question and your observation concerning development on the Northern Range, and particularly in instances where development is taking place without the grant of planning permission. At least I could speak from that point of view. We acknowledge that this is a situation that is not only limited to the Northern Range, but we approach this through our enforcement arm. Total Country Planning Division, we have our enforcement unit with enforcement officers who would investigate complaints and with a view to, first of all, securing compliance through the planning process. Where there is non-compliance, we move toward the enforcement function, where matters are processed and researched and with a view to taking the matter to court. Now, of course, this requires information. We have to do the relevant due diligence in order to present a matter that would be successfully prosecuted at the level of in the court system. So we don't only do this alone. There are other legislation and other agencies with whom we cooperate. Well, I know you know quite well the situation with local government, but we also do joint investigation with the Environmental Management Authority in order to deal with these instances using a broad breadth of legislative instruments available to us to address these incidences of unauthorized development on our hillsides.
Is it possible that you could provide to the committee how many cases are being currently investigated and how many successful? Well, I don't think I've ever read anyone being charged or fined, but that could be me. And I do have one question, Madam PS. I'm not sure if you will send it. One last question regarding this issue. Now, everyone here understands the importance of climate change, right? All these agencies, we know exactly what is happening, why. But I saw something that I thought was quite interesting in the response, stating that the MDA is not collaborating with the MPD. Now, I know that's diplomatic, but I would really like some details. And I will follow Senator Wade Mark in asking for information about this, because, we like to know.
It would be lovely, member, if you could assist me by just pointing me to what part of my response that I said we weren't getting the level
Page
of
page nine.
the level of collaboration that we would have liked.
Question 14.
Question 14. The monitoring. Okay, then. So the responsibility of one of the responsibilities would be for us to monitor and track goal development in terms of Vision 2030.
Right.
Yes. So what we've done and what that little section is referring to is that you have to come up with the indicators. You have to know what you're monitoring.
Yes, correct.
It is not always such a simple or easy matter to get your sister agencies to respond by giving you the indicators that they would agree should be tracked, because it means they have to be collecting the data. So it's not as if they are trying to be difficult. They have to be upfront and say, it makes no point in giving me an indicator when you know that you're not collecting the data or you don't have the capacity to collect the data. So it's a process. Yeah. And since then, we have gotten sufficient responses that the actual document is under the consideration of the cabinet.
Okay, good. Great.
Yeah. And we do hope that it will, we will get a positive outcome in that. And then our MDs will begin to collect the data necessary so that at some point in time, the Ministry of Planning and Development could actually report on progress.
Thank you very much, Madam PS. I enjoyed that response. And although I promised I wouldn't ask the local government, but I am a politician, so to the local government representation here, I do have one question that I want for the edification of my colleagues regarding the disaster management units throughout the 14 corporations. I would like to know, well, I know it's 14 disaster units. I would like to know about the staffing issues, if it's fully staffed. And I'd also like to know for the public's edification that it's not ODPM, right? First responders. Yes, Mr. David, I am certified, so I know. And if we could just say that for the public to also understand this particular aspect. And I know, Ms. Christopher, you have practical experience in this field also. So I'm very interested. Can we just talk about the staffing issue briefly, please? Thank you.
Thank you for the question, member. There are 14 corporations. There's a disaster management coordinator, 2 field officers, and a communication technician. That makes up the disaster management unit. Thankfully, the regional corporations themselves and the member who was instrumental in getting other people hired to the units so that we have additional support coming from, and we have checkers, we have OJTs, we have other departments ceding some of their officers to the disaster management unit. Perhaps Ms. Christopher can tell us about the Diego Martin Regional Corporation, where she probably has the largest number of individuals working there, and how they go about staffing that particular DMU.
Definitely. Thank you, Mr. David. Thank you, members. Diego Martin Borough Corporation does have the biggest disaster management unit. Besides myself as the coordinator, we have 2 field officers, we have a communications technician, we have 3 checkers at the office, 3 daily rated checkers from the Ministry of Local Government and Rural Development. And we also have a semi-skilled laborer at the office. Besides that, we have a disaster response team A, which is manned with 10 men which 8 of them are skilled tree cutters, skilled arborists, as we would like to say. And as of November 2022, we have, and those 10 men, from the Disaster Response Team A are also daily rated workers. The Response Team 2B is 30 contracted workers that responds to manual labor. As we know, the geography of Diego Martin is very hilly. So when there are landslides and hazard impacts, we cannot use equipment. So we need manual labor. Response Team B is responsible for going into domestic landslides or any other domestic hazard impact that may have happened. And that's the staffing of the Martin Disaster Unit.
So Chairman, through you, the query indulgence once more. And thank you very much. I'll expect, because you all have the sea and you all have the mountain all in one particular area. So I came from the lovely borough of Arima, which is very flat. So, no, we have a hill, but not a mountain. What I want to ask though, again, I'm a member of public just sent in this question, and this is the Ministry of Planning and Development. This member is asking how many hillside developments are being investigated, and has any action been taken against anyone? And I would just also like to know about the staffing with this particular team to investigate. It'll be interesting to know, because, and Madam PS, the cooperation with the corporation, I'm also interested in that, because we have building inspectors who are also supposed to do similar duties. Is this working out? If not, tell us why.
Member, I could see that you're determined to reveal all and to pull back the curtains.
Madam PS, people have to do their jobs.
Very well, ma'am. Very well. Before I hand over to the director for some other specifics that she may or may not have on hand, we noted that you asked the same question, and I took note of it. Let's see what evidence we can get from, have we taken anybody on a hillside to the court? So we are going to pursue that data for you. Yeah. So the member of the public will, unfortunately, I can't speak to that just right now. I am really, I'm not too sure that I'm glad that you've raised the issue, but I will speak to it. For years, we have been talking about individual units or departments within ministries may not have sufficient people to do lots of things. But you made reference to similar work. And why cannot we, and Member Mark alluded to that in a different context, why can't we ensure that all of the people who may have some similar responsibilities be trained to be each other's eyes? Yes? Just yesterday, my team, we were discussing this very same thing. So local government has inspectors. We have inspectors. We also have enforcement officers. The entire team is on contract, and it's less than 21. 21-ish is like the number. And you're talking about, but it could be corrected by the director for me, could correct me. So you're talking about an entire country. Yes, Trinidad may be small, but it's still a lot of land. So we need to get to the point the EMA has police from time to time out there. Works may have people on the ground as well. Public health has people on the ground as well. So there shouldn't ever really be a challenge in identifying the complaint, in seeing the issue. The challenge really comes sometimes when some of our agencies say to us, you have the legislation, we don't have the legislation. But there are many cases in which more than town and country actually has the legislation that could be used. But you very well know, member, that there are things that will have to go before the council, and depending on the nature of the council, they may not want to take it further. So you have that as well. We have a lot of members of the public out there not quite knowing who to go to, and they get very annoyed when Town and Country Planning Division says to them, that's an issue about a drain outside your home, and it's really for under the jurisdiction of the relevant regional corporation. Just you put yourself in the shoes of others. We don't care about that. We just know that we are hurting and we are not getting the kind of service that we need. So there is room for improvement. I don't have any specific solution at this point, but I know that we all face the challenges of staffing, but we have to come up with a different way in which we can work together to share that responsibility much more effectively and efficiently. That's just one, I would say for now. Yes, and I am committed to getting you some information, but I know that you are well aware of some of the difficulties. One of the things we did not say is that we're also working together with the Land Settlement Agency that is facing the pain. I know they want to bring policy to say, let's stop the squatting and informal settlement. And they've done quite a bit of work and tried to get it to various levels to be approved. That's no simple matter.
Very much.
Thank you, Pierre Science. May I invite Member Hislop to join the conversation?
Thank you, Chairman. We're treating this afternoon with flood mitigation. And what I have been hearing quite a lot is that we have a lot of studies taking place or to take place. As Member Mark said, the next disaster that may hit us, he said people would lose their lives. I hope not. So I'm hoping that we don't have loss of lives. But what we have is a lot of studies. What I would like to ask is timelines in terms from studies to implementation. And this one, Chair, I think is directed to the PS for the Ministry of Works. If I heard correctly, there is a comprehensive drainage study that is to be done. I don't know if I missed the phrasing. And if that is the case, when do you expect something like that to be completed and then for implementation?
Thank you, Member. What was referenced earlier was the National Drainage Plan, which came out of a study. In the plan, we have projects to be implemented, as well as further studies to be done. So that study that we spoke about that came with the plan that is finished. And out of it, we have concrete projects to be done. And we also have certain institutional areas that we need to address. And we also need to update studies. Now, I have often heard the issue of studies, but in the present environment that we are in, it is even more critical that we update our information. Yes, Member. So we do have that is a plan that has already, the construct of it has already been completed. We have projects emanating from it that we are pursuing or we are to pursue, and we have institutional arrangements also identified. I do believe we may have sent the actual plan to one of the committees. I'm not certain which one, but we have done that. But if there's any further information you'd like, we can do that. Outside of these studies, I'm hearing you, and the plan, I'm hearing you speak to concrete works. And I want to phrase this part properly, because I do thank God as well that we have not had any major national disaster as it relates to flooding in the recent past. I will also state it has not been because of a lack of rainfall. The rainfall has continued to increase, with the possible exception of last year. But the intensity has continually increased, and the ministry has also sought to undertake works with a greater intensity. We have increased our project output under our river cleaning program over the years from the period that has been spoken to. We have moved from the single-digit hundreds to 200 to 300. Last year, we did up to 600, over 600 desilting projects. We do have in excess of 500 planned for this year. We have also continued working on our other infrastructure projects in terms of upgrading river channels, etc., the construction of banks. We have major projects initiated this year as it relates to the river mouths and to certain key water courses. So we have, and in doing that, we have also sought to include in the planning process the information we've gotten from the studies and what we have been seeing over the years in terms of the increased rainfall. So we've included that in the planning process. So we have actually been increasing our project output in the different areas over the years, which we have provided to the committee, and we can provide further details, as I said, Chairman. I hope thank you.
So, so thank you. Thank you, Madam PS. I just want to stay in the conversation with regards to the rehabilitation and the maintenance of water courses. And I'm happy to hear that, that you have so many projects scheduled. So, so two questions here. One is if you can provide in writing the schedule of the projects and the areas in which they're going to be undertaken, because I wear my hat as a member of parliament here. Whenever January comes around, you're wondering what is happening to the water courses in your own constituency. And I'm sure the members of parliament here wonder the same. So the question is really, does a schedule exist in relation to the maintenance and rehabilitation of the water courses? And is there a way that these are prioritized? And the other question would be, what mechanisms exist to ensure that no water courses maintenance and rehabilitation is neglected? Quite often you would hear situations where, one water course might be cleaned twice or three times, and one would not have been cleaned for years. So what is there to ensure that this is done uniformly and in a manner that will bring the results we expect?
So, Chairman, the ministry is organized in a district manner as it relates to drainage. So we have 4 districts, and what we do is that we do an assessment of the water course in each district. We combine that with the flood patterns over the years, which, as you know, would change at times. And it's based on that we develop the program of works for the desilting program. I have heard the statement that at times you would find that a water course may be cleaned more than once for the year, whereas another water course may not be cleaned at all. And that really relates to where that water course is, the prevalence of so each water course would have a tendency or a prevalence in terms of the development of algae and other things, and in terms of siltation, where it results in increased siltation, etc., which would decrease the capacity of the waterfall. And so you may find that, yes, a water course may be cleaned twice, but that is in relation to need. That is assessed by the engineer in the particular district.
Thank you, Madam PS. I note from your submission that you have, the 2 ways that you do this. One would be with what we can term manual labor, and then you have where you need technical equipment. Do you have enough of the labor force to do this cleaning? Or do you have a challenge in that area? And the same can be asked as far as your technical equipment is concerned. Sometimes you might be told that this river can't be done because the equipment is in another area. So how do you treat with these challenges?
So in terms of the desilting program, the ministry generally does that program under 809, where we would rent equipment. Because of the magnitude of the requirement, we have a tendency to rent equipment. We also have some in-house capacity as well, but from an economic standpoint and the quantum, we may rent equipment. The question of the utilization of manual labor, oftentimes we would have to utilize manual labor where we are unable to utilize a mechanized system, and that is That tends to happen where we have this issue of an overcrowding of the riverbank or the watercourse bank, where we cannot place the pieces of equipment, and therefore we have to send manual labor in. It is not something that, as a ministry, we would want to. I want to put this delicately, because when we send people in to do it manually, we are actually putting our labor force into conditions that we would prefer not to have them in, but it cannot be helped because of how we have certain developments in certain areas. We can only use manual labor. In terms of the quantum of labor, we generally have a fair cadre of staff. It is the requirement, sometimes the issue of knowing exactly how much it fluctuates based on the same problem I'm speaking to. But we do have a cadre of staff.
Yeah. Thank you, Madam PS. I just want to engage, before I give way to other members in the committee, the Ministry of Agriculture, Land and Fisheries, and if I can invite Mr. Barak Hussein to comment on this. And this relates in relation to your submission, sir, which says that specifically the Ministry of Agriculture, Land and Fisheries is engaged in desilting works and channel clearing, drain construction and maintenance, embankment formation, construction, operation and maintenance of sluice gates, supply installation, operation and maintenance of drainage pumps, and operating mobile pumps to assist in emergency drainage during instances of flooding. So this speaks to some measure of overlap with what the Ministry of Works and the Drainage Division is responsible for. So can you give us some idea of, how the two ministries work together? Because it sounds like there might be some overlap. So if you can clarify for the committee and the public where the Ministry of Agriculture comes into all of this with regards to these functions.
The Ministry of Agriculture, Land and Fisheries would focus these efforts in food producing areas, and the works would generally be done through the Land and Water Management Division, and they will collaborate with the Ministry of Works. We have the Deputy Director who can give some details in this regard. Ms. Shah.
Thank you for the question, Chairman. I would like to indicate that these desilting works that has been mentioned in the response in number 5 of the question, I would like to mention that these are the flood monitoring of the channels that were done for the areas called, written here, the Sugrim Trace, Jerningham, Cunupia, Caroni, Felicity. Those were the desilting done by the in-house equipment at the engineering division, and we supplied excavator to desilt these areas because they were flooded at that time. And we also have a program where we supply mobile pumps when these areas are flooded. So we assisted the farmers especially in the Caroni and Felicity areas in 2023, where 10 kilometers of waterways were desilted, and in the also later on they did another 1.5 kilometers in the Felicity area. Besides, apart from these in-house equipment being used, we have done desilting in other areas, as the Permanent Secretary mentioned. We have done desilting under our boat water management boats, which is, we have the K001 and the K003. We would normally verify if any of the channels are being done by the other sectors of, like the drainage division. We would communicate with them to verify if these channels are being done by them before we put them on our PSIP program. So we would have done we would have put up for 6 channels last year, but we were able to do 2 so far, and we have 4 other channels which we will be doing this year. So these were done under our recurrent expenditure board too, and we had verified first that these were not being done under the Ministry of Works Drainage Division. Thank you.
Thank you, Michelle. So, PS Yearwood and maybe PS Hines, you see the issue I'm raising here because you have 2 different agencies that could be doing the same thing, and from where I sit, sometimes you might think that one might say, okay, the other one is doing it, and in the end, nobody's doing it. So, PS Francis Yearwood, are you satisfied that this is a satisfactory arrangement?
So, Chairman, in the main, the ministry is responsible for main water courses. And if we listen carefully to what the Ministry of Agriculture talked about, they spoke to irrigation and local channels. And that is where the differentiation tends to lie. And we try to keep that that differentiation to the extent possible. Where we are able to assist our colleague ministry, we do so, and we keep in constant contact our drainage division with the agriculture ministry and their division in terms of the work that they do. We also seek to keep in contact with the Ministry of Local Government and Rural Development.
Thank you. As you know, sometimes you would call and you'll be told it's Ministry of Works, and then Ministry of Works will say it's Ministry of Agriculture. But anyway, we'll move on from that point. I want to invite Member Patisa to join the conversation, and then Member Hislop.
Thank you, Chairman. So I had a couple points that were already raised. One had to do with so I'm hearing a lot about flooding, but to me, flooding is just a symptom of climate and the way that we develop land. So I think that was that point was already raised. But my question with land had to do with how much attention are we paying to that one, and what policies are in place for ensuring that further development, what further development looks like, right? Secondly, this ties into the SDG 11, which the wording of which I have a problem with. If I feel like if there's a good case for the self-government, it would be the SDGs. But we'll talk about that. So the SDG 11 says to make cities and human settlements inclusive, resilient, and sustainable. My question is this division of cities and human settlements, because I feel that it informs the way that we think about development. So there's this further urbanization taking place. Are we considering how we are using our land? Because we would probably be classified as a small island state, and therefore we have particular climate concerns, right? So my question would be, how are we thinking about it, and what measures do we have in place for that? So that's question 2. I don't know who will be able to pick that up. Yeah, to manage land, also the way that we think about development, right? Urbanization, how we construct things on the land. The third has to do with what Member Mark raised about having one body, because in approaching this, it felt very confusing. Like we had so many hands in there. But there was a line in the what ODPM submitted, the cabinet approval to become the national focal point to guide the implementation of the Sendai framework, which is now being brought together with the CARICOM's comprehensive disaster management. Is this a movement to bring everything under one umbrella? What does that mean? What does becoming the national focal point? So those are my 3 questions.
One, please. Your science.
Maybe I could just start off. Yeah. I like that question. Our thoughts about land and the management of land. So I would begin by saying, in Trinidad and Tobago, we have got to first accept that we are a small island development state. What does that mean, really? So we do not have huge areas of land like the United States or South America or Guyana. So our reality is what it is. And if you have a map up before you, you would see we have hills, the northern range, a little something in the south and a little something central. And surrounding that, what do we have? A lot of flood-prone areas, yes? But this is our reality. So what then do we conclude? There was a season and there was a time, I am certain, where we said absolutely no building in flood-prone areas. And that is what the director was going to share a bit more information on in terms of our thinking together with our sister agency, Drainage Division, creating no-build zones. So there are some areas in terms of our thoughts that we should not build on at all because it's just too costly in terms of protecting life and property. Yeah. But there are some areas that are flood prone, but these are traditional villages that have been there forever. So what do you then do? To weigh the cost benefit analysis and say, let's relocate entire villages. There's a cost to that. And decisions would have to be made if that's the way we think we would want to go. So what does the Town and Country Planning Division do? They accept the reality of the space that God has given to us and think of creative ways in which we could still achieve the objective of individuals having a home, safe environments. So a simple example. I remember for years, we would only allow development in a particular area in St. Helena. You do know that St. Helena floods a lot. But then we looked at the standards and the guidelines and we said, maybe now what we could agree to is that you go up higher, but leave the bottom, the lower floor, undeveloped. So that if perchance the river is not, or the channel is not silted at an appropriate time and then flooding happens, but so much has been improved since then. So those are the kinds of thoughts, ways in which we can still allow development, but still protect people and protect property and protect investment. So it isn't always a simple no. But there are cases where we are seeing, based upon the studies, based upon our sister agencies providing us with information, where we would want to recommend not at all. But you would have heard the conversation coming out today that we still have a challenge of enforcement, that even when we say not at all, unless we can have approvals of those sort of standards and guidelines at the highest level, we could actually be taken to court. It's people's land, And if you are not going to be allowed to develop your land, then there has to be a state response. There are other territories, other jurisdictions where land is swapped, or you do land banks, so that if you're taking the land or you're saying you can't develop it, something else could be arranged. So there are creative ways. Another example, of course, would be the very same hillsides. Back in the day, the first hillside policy we had, the Northern Range hillside policy, actually said that you could not have development above 300 feet, I believe it was. And that standard came from public utilities and the WASA could not pump water higher than that. So there was a reason for that standard. But when we tried to continuously implement that standard, we were told that, but there is no reason why. And so again, you have to look at it again and see what could we do that would work for our people and to respect our existing cultures. So I will just say that for now. I don't know if the director, who is very wise in these things, would like to add some further thoughts.
Through the chair, I would like to add to that discourse, which was really eloquently started by PS. The question of policy raised by the member is well taken because it is really the policy that drives the use permitted on the particular parcel of land. The average person in Trinidad and Tobago at one point in his or her life will carry out development of land at some point in time, or at least the head of the household. So, and in view of the finite resource that is land here in Trinidad and Tobago as small island developing states, the question of the policy gains even more importance. And I would just like to add that it is important that the man on the street know that he knows or she knows, the woman on the street, that what is the policy for the area where he or she may be interested in developing. And you can have access to this information. And this is thanks to the digital transformation taking place at the division with the launch of the Develop TT online platform. You don't necessarily have to be an applicant. You can just go to the page and actually access the mapped public register and see and be guided by the policies you see in the area. And this is also such a useful tool because we're talking about accessibility of information and having information drive your decisions, not just at town and country planning, but at the regional corporation, at the ODPM, and other critical agencies involved in this issue of flooding here in Trinidad and Tobago. So I wanted to just point that out, that it is part of the public engagement where persons can have access. Now, with respect to standards, the standards are also derived from the policy. So depending on certain areas, you may just be able to conduct agricultural activities. And that is, in a manner of speaking, a way of controlling built development in certain areas which may be flood prone. These areas may perhaps be better for different types of cultivation of different types of crops. So, I mean, speaking of the SAW project earlier, this is also an idea where you have different uses. So the policy is also informed by the hydrology. There are certain no-build zones that are contemplated. Obviously, we are guided by the drainage division, not just in where persons should not build, but also if you are going to build, because there are areas which are residential areas, which are, I mean, we just look at the city where we are, there are rivers around. This country has water courses where people develop land, but they need to be guided by perhaps the setback or buffer zone, drainage infrastructure, as guided by the technical persons at the drainage division. So that is another way of informing development and a policy. But I concur completely with the member and the PS when it comes to questions of persons traditionally occupying areas that have been flood prone. And of course, it is natural for man to want to develop, and over time, these areas would expand. They would want to have a better home and maybe with more resilient materials. And the question of adopting technical standards when it comes to developing particularly homes, we are guided by technical standards that would inform the spatial development standards for example, the single-family home and multi-family home. So that is also quite important because there must be some underpinning that is technical in nature, driving the types of development and buildings that would be approved, not just at the level of the Town and Country Planning Division, which is policy and site development standards, but also at the regional corporation level.
Thank you, Mr. Armstrong. Member for the side. Before I move on to give way to Member Hislop, P.S. Hines, you mentioned a very interesting possibility in terms of creative ways of relocating people, so to speak. Are you in a position to say what percentage of the land in Trinidad, and just stick to Trinidad for the time, no discrimination, Tobago, of course, is owned by the state and what is privately owned? Do we have those percentages available? And for Tobago as well. Sure.
It's available, but I don't have it, because it would mean asking the Commissioner of State Lands. I thought you were going to say what percentage was flood prone. Well, because we do have some maps with that. We have some information coming out of the university. And you asked some questions earlier on about the socioeconomic cost.
Yeah.
And my girls sent me a study, but I would want them to pull out of it first.
Yeah.
ECLAC did a study. It's been difficult to get that information. But we do have evidence that ECLAC did a study on Trinidad and Jamaica.
Yeah.
So you have it, good. And they did mention some of the costs. But you want to know about state land versus private land? Yeah.
Owned by the state and owned privately. So that gives us an idea of how much bargaining power the state will have. So if you can provide maybe some...
The easiest way might be to find out what what the Commissioner of State Lands claims are still being state land, and then remind us that, and the rest is...
Yeah. So could you undertake to submit that in writing for us?
Yes.
Thank you very much. Member Hislop.
Thank you, Chair. If you permit me, I want to go back to TMOC. As it relates to the written submission, I'm looking at 1B, where it speaks to infrastructure development and maintenance. It says TMA is also involved in providing technical input for the design, implementation, and maintaining infrastructure that aids in flood mitigation. This can include input into development of draft legislation, town planning, constructing levees, drainage systems, and water retention areas. Question I have for Mr. Stewart is how is this facilitated, and what's the working relationship you have with the Division of Infrastructure, Urban Development and Quarries, I think is the new name?
Yes, indeed. Again, good afternoon.
Sure. Please continue.
Yes, indeed. The relationship is critically important in all of these aspects. So while we are speaking about infrastructure, the data that we collect on a yearly basis through monthly activities in terms of risks and how these hazards impact a different segment of our society here on the island, allow that information to be passed on to the divisions that has the responsibility. In this case, we are talking about the IQUD, which we know across the nation as Works Division, if I were to use that so we could bring our members in gear to what we are speaking about. So they are members of the Tobago Disaster Management Committee. They are engineers, they have access to that type of data, they know where the damages are, and therefore that type of input. But is it all well? No, it's not. I think there is also a need for a galloping type of aggressive movement to understand what exactly is happening in regards to climate change and climate variability. The type of incessant rainfall that we would have witnessed just 1 week after the COP28 was completed in Dubai, we saw what happened in Charlottesville, just at the northeastern end of the island. Along with the division, we were able to, working with members of the policy group, led by the Chief Secretary himself, we were able to walk the area and look at ways and means as to how corrective actions can be taken. And but I did hint to you in my response that there are some weaknesses, and those weaknesses have to be go back to probably as 1997. I remember in 1997 we had a meeting in Tobago. We were looking at the use of building products, and back in 1997 it was cited that there is a strong need for the country to embrace what is known as cubic. And some of the colleagues on the other side, you know, in this virtual room or at the meeting, you can might remember some of those discussions about cubic. It was speaking about the Caribbean, cubic spoke to the Caribbean building codes. And it is something that is lacking grossly across the island, and therefore we are agitating through processes such as the MCR, which is making cities resilient, so that the Tobago House of Assembly at its level can also speak to the national level and also influence the adaptation of building codes. Also, where you build. So I remember in 2004 and 2005, we had things like, through our recommendation after working with the University of the West Indies, when the northeastern end of the island was impacted, in Delaforte was devastated. We heard about the red zones. We were able to establish red zones, I mean, to the fury of some of the persons who were affected, but they were compromise made where the state took the responsibility of, when I say the state through the Tobago House of Assembly, those lands and say, listen, we will not allow you or we'll give you this land, but you're not supposed to build back at that location. The place where the deaths occur, there is still in the Delaforte area. That area is still not utilized by the current owners of the property. These are examples as to how policy can influence disaster management, where we seek to create resilience at the community level. And I don't know if you will allow me to allow some of the initiatives that we have undertaken. I'm not sure if you want to speak about that, contingency planning officer.
Sure. Thanks, both of you, Chair. A lot of the activities that we would have taken on towards ensuring that we had more community resilience would include a lot of sensitization. We would have done a lot of training in the various communities as well. We are ensuring that persons really adopt a culture of emergency exercising as well, because that would then talk to their being able to understand resilience at their level, especially that at the community level. And I don't know if Mr. Stewart would have mentioned, I don't think he would have mentioned it, at least not at this JSC yet, but we would have also adopted the CERT 1000 Strong program, whereby we would train persons at the community level to ensure that they have resilience in the forefront of their minds, whereby we are looking at having 1,000 volunteers who are multi-skilled and multidisciplined across all communities of the island. So those are some of the, I don't know if I would have missed out any of the major ones, but those are the ones I pass on.
I think in 2007 as well, we would have picked up on what we saw was necessary, where we impacted on a special needs program. And that special, and also looked at the residential structures of Tobago in a particular way. Yep. The study coming out of the findings of that program, we were working closely with the PRDI. You all remember the Policy Research Development Institute. I think that was the name of the PRDI, if I have the acronym correct. But that study indicated that Tobago just cannot withstand a Category 3 hurricane when you do the analysis. And you recognize that this is how weak in some areas are. And therefore, it speaks to, it influence things like what the Tobago House of Assembly embarked upon in terms of the rebuilding program for home improvement grants and things like that. Some of those initiatives, even though they are nationally now, some of it began right in Tobago, where those initiatives, the home improvement grants, allowing people to build back better. But we are still faced with certain weaknesses in the galloping necessity that is required in order for us to meet our goals, our UN goals for 2030. We just have 7 or 8 more years.
So, through you, Chairman. So, Mr. Stewart, you're saying that your relationship with the Division of Works, I believe they're part of your disaster management committee.
Correct, that's correct.
So there is that level of synergy between you and the Division of Works as it relates to infrastructure in Tobago. Now, I want to just follow up on this. In the last 10 years, we know with all this climate change taking place, Tobago is not necessarily prone to the level of flooding that Trinidad experiences. But have you seen any change in particular areas as it relates to areas now that were not prone to flooding in Tobago being prone to flooding, and how do we treat with that in terms of our future plans?
Okay. What was associated with the deaths that occurred in 2004 and 2005 came out of what you call flash flooding, cascading down the mountains of Delafour and Charlottesville and also Speyside. I remember sitting around the table with those days were DIPU, Division of Infrastructure and Public Utilities. And it required that type of input, and those discussions led to what we now have, a very settled area between the Delafour Hill going straight back into Speyside. The type of rehabilitation that was conducted by that division, that even when we would have had previous events, even that what occurred on the 19th, the stability of those mountainsides and the kind of reconstruction that went into it, rehabilitation that went into it, it stood the test of these other events coming forward, for such as Tumas in 2010 did not have the impact that it had back then. Some homes that we saw home improvement coming out of the home improvement grant. So the status of in the categories when we do the taxonomy on some of these homes, they changed significantly. So it helped. Another key thing, we spoke about quality a while ago, and it speaks to the ethos of our people. Tobago, on the other hand, being very much north of and very much higher within the hurricane belt, we would have recognized that the people have a different type of attitude because of their past experiences, and sometimes the cycle of events that occur within the island allow for it to be resonant on the minds. Today we are speaking about flooding, but how many persons, we had this conversation just a few days ago, from a national level, understand what happened to south of Trinidad in 1933? 11 people died. Thousands of homes were damaged as a result of that storm event that took place in Trinidad, south of Trinidad. And therefore, it's that type of sometimes what happens that occur that allow the disaster management to move forward.
Mr. Steele, I'm sorry, I didn't want to interrupt you, but the question speaks to whether we're seeing any changes taking place. Topography of Tobago is slightly different, but we still have low-lying areas in Tobago. So I'm asking, based on the effects of climate change, have we seen any changes over the last 5 to 10 years?
The southwestern end of the island.
Yeah.
The southwestern end of the island is something that we recognize that is becoming under serious threat as a result of flash flooding and ponding in those areas. So you have urban development taking place. The member from planning spoke about the relationship as it relates to what is happening with spatial development. And so we have seen the growth in the southwestern end of the island. And as a result of that, one second.
On the north side as well.
On the north side of Tobago. So we are seeing those increases in slope instability taking place as a result of the galloping pace of climate change and climate variability. The weather is becoming more intense. Rainfall are impacting us in a very significant, and it's very expensive for us. Landslides are extremely expensive, both on a public level, roadways, and also domestically.
Okay.
I will pause there. And I hope that answered the question.
Thank you. So, Member Morris Julian, followed by Member Mark.
This is again an observation for observation and a question also to the Ministry of Planning and Development. I'm very concerned. I read through rural development. Speaking about green infrastructure, I heard Mr. Kumar Singh speak about his particular initiative, which I'm very impressed with. In fact, I'm doing a community initiative with tires and vetiver plants to try. Yes, notice I said I'm trying, right? Mr. Kumar Singh, we'll have to talk, right? Right. So all the persons here should be able to solve this flooding issue. All the parties are here that should be able to solve this issue. Can we ask for someone to take the initiative and have the necessary meeting to come together as one? I know it can be difficult. I've been in the system long enough, the red tape, the bureaucracy, nobody wants to give way, etc. Because it's one thing to read about green infrastructure, it's very nice reading it, but the implementation is something that is necessary. And I can tell you horror stories, Ministry of Works, like a particular company that changed the course of the river. And the residents there are now seeing the after effects. And now the company is no longer there. And I say karma. But the point is the damage is still there. And I would just like, to find out from the Ministry of Planning. I keep putting the Ministry of Planning and Development because it is about planning and proper development. Is it possible that with climate change being what it is, that something can happen, something tangible can come out of this particular meeting? I say that because I would like to see my great-grandchildren. And I would like to know that they're not fish because they had to adapt to survive, right? Okay.
Yes, Science, you want to take that?
Some time ago, and I think I said that in my first contribution, the Ministry of Planning did embrace the intent to pull people together, to have that kind of conversation. For various reasons, we held a first meeting and we were not able to continue the push. So I'm committing to this, even though I'm soon to retire, but I'm committing to this. And I've already reached out to my colleague, the PS of Works, and we have agreed that we are going to call a meeting and the parties here will be part of it because they were there. Maybe not the same people, but they were there the first time. And we had other agencies as well. And what we're going to have to agree to is what kind of policies are we talking about? How does it give way to become some kind of plan of action and intervention? What will therefore then be required? Ministry of Works is very clear. They are almost the implementation arm. They are doing specific things. But that has got to come out of a clear plan and strategy. We have the ODPM here, we have TEMA there, but there's also thinking that flooding doesn't stand on its own. It's a subset of disaster. So maybe this time around, it may not be as difficult as it was before to have synergy in the thinking. I really think my colleagues here will respond to the cry to the call for us to begin a conversation again and see how far we could take it this time, knowing fully well that you will give some recommendations and you will hold us accountable.
Thank you very much, PS Hines, for that commitment, and by extension, PS Francis Yearwood. I want to invite Member Mark to join us again.
Again, I'd like to address this to PS planning or even works and transport. There was a recent study conducted and released for public consumption by ECLAC. It dealt with the traffic disaster in Trinidad and Tobago. That study took them 4 months, June to September of 2023. And the study was published recently. That study revealed that $2.3 billion, representing 1.5 to 1.7% of our GDP, is lost as a result of traffic madness in Trinidad and Tobago. Now, I raise this against the background of flooding. Has there been any study conducted by the Ministry of Works and Transport or the Ministry of Planning, or both, in conjunction with the CSO, to determine or to provide us with some average dollar value as it relates to losses experienced by the people of Trinidad and Tobago over the years? Is there any kind of information that can be provided to this committee on this issue? Anyone? ODPM, the PS in planning?
I will begin because Chair did ask us this earlier in the meeting, and we are committed to, we did mention the ECLAC study, which he has there, but we are committed to checking to see if any local work was done. Or I'm sure that over the years, individual figures have been purported for individual flooding events. But I'm not familiar with any sort of comprehensive study. Those of us in this room, and I'm sure it's not just going to be me, maybe as well my colleagues from ODPM and Ministry of Works, we committed to finding out, because it's a valid question. What has been the socioeconomic cost over the years?
You see, the reason why I've asked this... Oh, sorry. Sorry.
No, I was just going to piggyback off the PS in planning in terms of one, well, that 2019 ECLAC study did give a dollar value. It spoke to 0.05% as the dollar value, 0.05% of GDP, as the dollar value. And at the same time, I know there have been some localized information gathered. We did provide, or we did gather some information in undertaking the strategic development plan that we have at this point in time. The dollar value, once again, is not easily identifiable right now, but as indicated by PS Hines, we will undertake to do a thorough research.
You see, like in the United States, when there's a disaster in Florida, within a short period of time, a few weeks or months, a report is generated telling you if it's 10 billion, 30 billion, 40 billion. Because in Florida, they are organized. They take their business seriously. In Trinidad and Tobago, we are in silos. So nobody knows what is going on. So there's need for coordination. And somebody must take the initiative before we do to establish this unified legislative framework. for disaster management in the Republic of TNT. So in the interim, planning and development probably could take the lead, coordinate with works and transport, because 16, 17, 18, or 17, 18, and 19, we had a disaster in our country. And we don't have any data apart from what PS was talking about. PS, may I just remind me, are you saying that there was a report produced by ECLAC on flooding in Trinidad and Tobago and the equivalent was 0.05% of our GDP?
My understanding and my recollection, yes, the ECLAC study did seek to quantify. It was a case study between Trinidad and Tobago and Jamaica. And if I recall the conclusion, it did give a figure of 0.05% for Trinidad and Tobago.
Do you have a copy of that report?
I think the chairman
I
has
have a copy.
You have a copy.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, sorry,
yes.
Member. No, I was just going to say, PS. So those figures are correct, but they seem to reflect a specific time, and it's a low amount, but it does in the conclusion state, and I'll share the copy with the committee. The fact that this, in addition to the dollar effect, the other implications, social, health-wise, and so on. So we really need to have a study that reflects all of that. But Member Markey,
no, and that is why I'm saying that, you see, it would guide, as ODPM director said earlier, Chairman, policy, and policy can lead to legislation, and then planning and action or activities. So I'm saying that with all that is unfolding, we have to project the Japanese and the Americans, well, most of the Japanese, they plan 50 years in advance, 50 years in advance, they know where they are going. So there is need for some kind of coordination so that simple issues like what is being raised here, we could get answers from the public officials. But we are like fish out of water. We don't have any answers and we can't get any. I just want to go on, Mr. Chairman, because I realize that is an area that we have to pay attention to. I just want to go on. Madam PS, in planning, is there a current up-to-date land use policy in the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago? Oh, I remember there was one years ago, back in the 70s, 80s. Can you tell this committee, is there an updated land use policy as far as you're aware as PS in planning for Trinidad and Tobago?
So the one that you're remembering was published in 1984. That was reviewed and it's called the National Spatial Development Strategy. It's dated 2013, so that's the level of approval. What the Town and Country Planning Division continues to do, though, and even the regional corporations, they updated their specific areas, brought all of their plans to us in the Ministry of Planning, and that was taken and approved. So, and I know for a fact that the division continues to work and do land use policy reviews. So even though there is a larger document at lower areas, which would be at a regional level and at a local area level, those plans are constantly being updated.
So as we speak, you can say that in 2022, there is an updated national spatial plan, land use policy in your ministry. Who is housing this updated plan, as you mentioned? Who is responsible for updating those things when the information reaches X or Y? I'm not too sure. I don't know if you can clear the air for me.
So I would let the director explain to you how the policy review process takes place and what is the status of things thus far.
Thank you, Pierce. Through the chair, I'd like to address and add to Pierce's intervention. Policy reviews are conducted and they are triggered by certain situations. As you would appreciate, land does not stay static over time. You would remember Trinidad 50, 60 years ago does not look like Trinidad today. And there would have been reviews over time that we can all attest to. Now, what triggers a policy review? You may find that there are certain considerations when it comes to a growing population. There might also be socioeconomic drivers. But at the Town and Country Planning Division, what really triggers a need to update the policy would be the question of persons applying and are not being successful because of inconsistencies with the proposal, with the policy. These are often guided by appeal decisions by the Minister of Planning. And when you look at the trends, the developmental trends taking place, this would, of course, give rise to a need to conduct the various studies involved in the conduct of a policy review. Now, there are micro policy review, and these, of course, can be commissioned based on decisions, as well as changing infrastructure. We have new highways, etc. These new infrastructure would prompt a need to relook the policy in areas. You can also look at the question of climate change. You may have areas that are affected by sea level rise, incidences like that, where you find this conflict between the need to develop and the situation with the climate created by the onslaught of climate change. You would also see a need to look to change the policy. So I hope this gives an idea of the direction we take when addressing a policy review.
Yeah. Mr. Chairman, I just want to piggyback on Dr. Sharda Patasa's contribution earlier, and it was not addressed. If I recall what Dr. Patasa asked, and this would be directed at the Brigadier, right? Does the national focal point concept, as enunciated by your good self, does that represent a direction that is leading towards the formulation of legislation on a comprehensive scale to deal with a single approach to disaster management and flood mitigation, among other things? But bear in mind that somebody brought to our attention that if you're going to be comprehensive, we exist on fault lines. So we can have seismic occurrences in Trinidad and Tobago, 6.1, 5.1 on the Richter scale. So it's not only flooding, it has to be earthquakes as well. So I think the honorable member was raising the point that seeing that the ODPM has now become the national focal point for the Sendai, I think, framework. I think she was asking whether that is the beginning of this long journey to have a comprehensive legislative framework. And by the way, Brigadier, you did indicate the Disasters Measures Act, which is 1978, over 40 years old. I just wanted to ask you as well, you talk about draft amendments. Could you inform this committee when the amended Disasters Measures Act will visit our parliament based on what is being done. So those are two issues: national focal point, comprehensive legislation, stepping stone towards that. And based on your earlier submission, the Disasters Measures Act, as it relates to amendments, when can we expect same in the parliament? Can you clear for us, please?
Thank you very much, Member Mark. And I'm happy that you brought back the question that Member Patterson had raised, because I intended at some point in time to bring it back on the table if the opportunity presented itself. And the answer is yes. And I think I would have alluded to that this is what the intent was. You see, sometimes we don't realize some of the valuable things that we do in disaster management. And that is exactly what the thinking was, that we needed this strategic organization that was going to bring all our ministries together. But we went even further than that. We went to bring the private sector, and I did mention civil society organizations. This is seen by many countries in the region as one of the best practices that they are copying. In fact, I'll share that for the United Nations Office for Disaster Risk Reduction, this is something that they commend Trinidad and Tobago on. So we already have this committee that is seen as being one of those global best practices. And it provides the opportunity for so many things to happen. And I would have mentioned that we would have done last year critical infrastructure protection resilience. And when you think about how you're going to do that, critical infrastructure goes across all sectors. And as a result of that, that committee was very much involved in the outputs. And now we enter the implementation stage. So I want to make sure that the public hears about the National Disaster Prevention and Preparedness Multi-Sectoral Committee. Because what you just mentioned is the exact purpose of that committee, and it has been working. And you had asked me before, what was some of the things? So when we speak about the public alert notification system, when we speak about all those things came out of that joint committee. So it is a model. When you look globally, there are models similar to what we're doing in Trinidad and Tobago, and it will provide us with building readiness and building resilience. I want to also emphasize for Member Patterson as well, that even before we had this committee, and this is a strategic committee comprising of senior members of the public sector, but there's also a very tactical committee in the event of a disaster situation, and the ODPM has to get involved. We have a committee, it's called, it's a system called the National Emergency Operations Center, which is a location, but it is a system of persons who are involved in various ministries, various agencies, as well as the private sector, who are there ready to provide support in the event something happens. With regard to the legislation, again, this body, in fact, let me take the opportunity and say thanks to the Trinidad and Tobago Red Cross Society, as well as the International Federation of the Red Cross, because they are seen as experts in disaster law, and they offered to the ODPM to provide assistance. So the legislation has been upgraded, but I also indicated, I think this is the most important thing. When we looked at the legislation, we found that not sufficient work had been done in terms of climate change. And therefore, this review is taking place to ensure that that integration happens. To answer you specifically, I would say within a year's time, we should have that legislation in Parliament.
That is a comprehensive.
A very comprehensive legislation that takes into account all the things we spoke about today, as well as things we haven't spoken about. So Trinidad and Tobago, again, is ahead of a number of countries in terms of these things that we're doing.
So you would need to coordinate very closely with our distinguished PS.
Certainly.
Planning,
Certainly.
right? Because the distinguished PS had indicated earlier that we were about to make, she will take the initiative, although she's about to retire, to bring everybody together. So I think that you need to coordinate with her so she will know that you are the national focal point and your team is on the ball. In fact, I think the distinguished PS will be part of your multi-stakeholder team because you bring all ministries together, all stakeholders together, civil societies. So I'm just telling you, have a chat with her privately. But I have another point I want to raise. Madam PS Planning, can you tell us, because you were onto something earlier and it struck me, it ignited my spirit, because that was a very important point in the context of the intensification of climate change. And you talk about changing, building, what did you call it? Changing, designing, housing. So in other words, instead of going as we normally do, building flat, you would think, go up. And later on, if you want to add, you add, but go up. What I want to ask is this. Is there an intention on the part of planning and development through Town and Country Planning Agent to develop a new building code that can be passed into legislative form that would regulate not only new housing design for Trinidad and Tobago in anticipation of what is to come here and the disaster that we have to avoid in terms of loss of lives in Trinidad and Tobago, but have a building code incorporated in that code for general buildings in Trinidad and Tobago, conscious of the fact that we may go from 4.7 on the Richter scale to 8.5. And therefore, if we go at 8.5, we all dead. Because you know why? Apart from one or two buildings that may be 9 or 9.5, and those are few and in between, the majority of our buildings in Trinidad and Tobago, I do not believe can withstand an 8 point on the Richter scale and remain unscathed. So therefore, I am suggesting and I'm recommending to you that you ought to, if you have not yet considered this particular matter, work through the Town and Country Planning, formulate a code, a building code, both for new housing designs as well as new buildings in Trinidad and Tobago, and have that take legislative form in this country. I don't know, Madam PS, if you can respond to this and whether you believe this is a matter you can take on before you exit the ministry. And at least we'll be able to get before Parliament, before you leave, a building code representing and reflecting all that you have said and all that I've supported and just added. So I would like to get your response to this particular matter, ma'am.
Thank you, member. Very quickly, I would say that this was attempted before. The responsibility was placed under a different ministry at the time. An actual committee was established. Ministry of Planning was part of that committee specifically as well, Town and Country Planning Division, and lots of unfortunate things happened. Let's just say that no national building code was developed. Notwithstanding that, the Trinidad and Tobago Bureau of Standards has been reaching out to the Ministry of Planning and Development asking, can we try again? There is a small building code, because I'm hearing you, but that has been produced by the Trinidad and Tobago Bureau of Standards, but that is a voluntary standard. It's very well done, but it is a voluntary standard. And I would just put it out there for the public consumption. It's a very expensive exercise because what you're calling for is several codes coming together. And the mistakes I think they have discovered that were made in the past, when you create a committee, you really don't have a dedicated resource. You have people who are coming together to lend their minds and their thoughts. They brought lots of experts together, but that's people's time. Private sector experts, you have to be able to pay for this. So having understood where I think it fell short before, we will meet with the Trinidad and Tobago Bureau of Standards and see what's possible. How are we going to do it? But we will all agree on this side that it's imperative. It's necessary.
Take my leave on this one. Madam PS, I'm sure you and the PS in Works and Transport, the Director, ODPM, Ministry of Rural Development and Local Government, must have relations with ECLAC, the UNDP, and other international recognized and or reputable bodies. And I'm sure we can establish some degree of coordination to bring best practice. Because I know from sources that buildings that are going up in Trinidad and Tobago, especially state buildings, they follow the American code, many of them, so that they don't want an earthquake to pass here, 5 or 4, and the whole building collapse like sand. So they have adopted in their building of these huge structures in Trinidad and Tobago, the American building code. So I know that has been told to me. So what I'm simply advising is whether the time has not arrived, given the urgency of the moment and what is unfolding, for an initiative to be taken by your ministry, planning and development, through town and country planning. Because town and country planning, I have to submit my new housing plan to them. I can't build a house in Trinidad and Tobago without the town and country planning approving it. So they are really properly and suitably placed to put that into effect. So what I'm simply saying is that I would like to respectfully suggest that that is an initiative that can be taken by the Ministry of Planning and Development. You are the leader, town and country planning is the executor, and you may have other agencies, housing and others coming to give you support. But at the end of the day, the initiative, the driver, the driving force is the Ministry of Planning and Development. So I would like to respectfully suggest that it would be in the interest of saving lives in the future, but it needs legislative force. It needs to be legislated. And as you said, it cannot be voluntary. It must have the force of law. So that is my only contribution to the distinguished PS, and I hope she will take it on board and you'll have my full support on it.
May I just say one thing, Chair? I know
Sure,
time is
yes.
against us. Agreed, understood. I would like to put it out there as well, in addition to the importance of it being legislated so that it will have the full force of the law. Planning recognizes the expectations that everyone has of planning. And as a PS who is soon to leave, notwithstanding that, what I have embarked upon is a new strategic plan for the ministry, inclusive of a manpower audit. You see the lots of expectations, it requires dedicated resources. And what I have now, as expert as many of them are, as willing as many of them are, it's a whole lot. And the mandate keeps expanding. So what we've recognized that. We've recognized that certain balls may have dropped simply because we did not have the dedicated resources to pursue. So we are hoping, and I'm putting it out there in the public so that lots of other people will support us when eventually it goes to the Ministry of Public Administration and brought, before the right people so that it could be approved. I need more hands. Thank you.
Thank you, PS. I just want to endorse that it has to become law rather than voluntary. Officials, we are coming to a close. Before I invite Member Patterson, Member Hislop, I just wanted to re-engage the Ministry of Rural Development and Local Government with regards to the disaster management plans. Page 1 of your submission, there is I see there's currently been undertaken an update for the Port of Spain City Corporation. So I just want to ask two questions in regard to that, Mr. David. Was there something that necessitated that update in the short space of time? And also, whether you can, I have in front of me, second question relates to a document which speaks to the Port of Spain flood alleviation project and the issues that happen whenever it rains in the capital city. So can you address those two issues for us?
Mr. Chairman, the issue of Port of Spain and the flooding, although the city of Port of Spain has a jurisdiction, a lot of the impact, the hazards are caused by the actions or work of the Ministry of Works Drainage Division. They are the ones who control the drainage in the city of Port of Spain. For instance, we have seen many cases where the St. Anne's River overflows, and in many cases we have seen water running through the Queen's Park Savannah and ending up way down in Woodbrook. Yes, so that and mostly it is caused by flash flooding. It is not the flooding that we have in our approach, outer approach. It's flash flooding, and again, we can talk of climate change and what it has done, bringing a whole lot more water in a shorter period of time in areas that have traditionally not been impacted before. You will find that climate change impacting the city of Port of Spain in that way. And it's basically mainly a lot of water debris because of the St. Anne's River. You ask about, every year we try to update the emergency plan. Right now we are doing that at the ministry because we do it every year. Not only those plans we update every year, we try to update the vulnerability and hazard maps for each municipal corporation annually. And this information, the DMU will pass on to the councils so that they will make decisions with respect to what action they will take, which water costs they will treat with based upon the allocations that they get. But at the ministry level, we work with the DMU to produce these hazard and vulnerability maps. Okay.
So, Mr. David, I suspect that PS Francis here may want to join the conversation with regards to the issues in Port of Spain. Yes.
Thank you, Chairman. The issues in Port of Spain are complex issues. My colleague mentioned the issue of flash flooding, and that, of course, is true. In terms of responsibility, it is not a singular responsibility. I sometimes like to simplify the issue of flooding a little in when I'm speaking in terms of the rainfalls. The quantum of rain may or may not be able to be controlled by the capacity of some of our major river courses. There is flooding or there is excess water. The excess water, but water then is supposed to go into from main rivers and water courses into the local drains And then if the local drains are not to capacity, once again, flash flooding or even worse. So I sort of want to make that distinction, because when you speak about flooding in Port of Spain, you do have flooding that happens based on water coming from the main water courses, such as Maraval, St. Anne's, etc. And you have water that cannot be contained within the localized drains. The localized drains have a responsibility. There's an organization responsible for the localized drains. There's an organization responsible for the rivers, and we must take that into consideration. We also have to take into consideration that a number of the localized drains, etc., for the city of Port of Spain are of a nature that they are aged, extremely aged. Port of Spain being one of our earliest settlement areas in the country, outside of St. Joseph, etc. And development has happened in such a way that it has not just overtaken the capacity, but it has impinged on the built infrastructure, has impinged on the built infrastructure for the drainage flow. All right. So it is not just a simple matter, and it does have a multi-sectoral responsibility. The ministry has continued to make sure that it includes Port of Spain area in its overall plan, and it is part of our strategic drainage plan. And it is one of the areas, and I have to use this word again, that has to have an updated study, to ensure that we know where the different infrastructure actually lies, and that then we are able to properly size it based on, or recommend the proper sizing based on the information we have. And I just want to respond to one other area, because I know that this is a live hearing, and I'm always very cognizant of the information that goes out. So in terms of built infrastructure, the Ministry of Works and Transport does have a responsibility under its construction division for the structural integrity of, in particular, public buildings, and also gives, when requested, the input on submissions for approval of buildings. And while I want to echo the sentiments given by the PS in Planning and Development, I just want to share that we have also been approached by the Bureau of Standards in terms of a national code. But what we must know as well is that we do follow the IBC, which is the International Building Code. And just I noted some of the levels that was raised in terms of 4 and 5 and etc. We did have a 6.5 recently, and we stood the test of time, and we are hoping as a ministry that we will continue to make sure that the input into the National Building Code, the utilization of the International Building Code, will ensure that we will have the highest levels of safety in Trinidad and Tobago. Needed to just bring that piece out just a little bit. Yeah.
Thank you, PS. So just before we close, I just want to invite Member Patisa and then Member Hislop.
Thank you, Chair. To build on what you were saying, that whole idea of drainage and Port of Spain was exactly the point that I was raising, at the level of development and how we're thinking about development, and then we're not catering for that. So this question has to do with the rainfall. Does the Ministry of Planning and Development, Ministry of Works as well, work with studies? Maybe, I don't know if we have any studies that project by geography in the island what the water levels would be and how those drain out. Yes. Over maybe a 5 or 10 year period.
I suspect that maybe, just 1 minute, please excuse me.
I am tempted to just rub my colleague's back here a little bit. But while some water is had, in terms of at the ministry level, we do studies in relation to different catchment areas, and the catchment areas in undertaking the studies would project. And based on that projection, that is how the different projects are developed. So there is that projection that is undertaken. It also, we also seek to utilize the information and data that's provided by different agencies, the Water Resources Agency, for example, and also information that is provided by the work that has been done, for instance, from Ministry of Local Government and Rural Development. I'm always very cautious that I get the full thing. Yes, I know I mixed it up. I put it back to front every now and then.
Yeah. And in addition to that, we continue to have a very good relationship with the University of the West Indies.
Yes.
And they continue to do studies that can be used by all of the implemented agencies. One little example, since some members here spoke about earthquakes. The Ministry of Planning and Development has partnered with the UE Seismic Research Center. And so they have been doing microzonation studies, which tell the extent to which the earth shakes and how it affects buildings. So the kind of data coming out of that will again continue to guide policies from areas that we should not develop. Some areas, because it's reclaimed land, how much shaking we could expect, and therefore, how do you retrofit buildings? So that's the kind of continuous work that's being done to assist all of these regulatory agencies to, at the end of the day, to recommend standards and guidelines that would even be better than what we may have done in the past.
Member Hislop.
Thank you, Chairman. Just to go back to my colleagues in Tobago again, very quickly. I noticed there were some devices that were installed at particular areas, in the Scarborough area, that spoke to your monitoring and early warning systems for flooding. Just for the sake of the public, Mr. Stewart, could you speak to how that system works and, well, whether the system has been activated and how does it work?
Thank you very much. Yes, indeed, the flood early warning system, community flood early warning system has been a feature that has been added to the cache of what we would have brought into place since 2008. So we started with the multi-hazard early warning system. We have 4 on the islands now. And through the efforts, national efforts, 7 of the early warning systems, I think 2 of them were installed. 2 of them were installed in the Tobago. And I will ask my colleague to speak to the issues as to how they have been going. I know there have been some challenges with data currently as a result of our topography. So that is being addressed. So you want to talk, Ms.
That's no problem.
Yeah.
All right. Good evening again, everyone. So thanks for that, Mrs. Stewart. Going back a little bit, I believe my colleague in ODPM, Ms. Shana Khan, would have touched on exactly what this is, and it's very similar, if not the same system that is utilized and was implemented by the Water Resources Agency. So basically, these community flood early warning systems were installed in 2 areas where we would have realized realize that there are high there is high flood activity. Additionally, we are currently moving into phase 2 of that program, whereby we are looking at the installation of about 5 additional community flood early warning systems. Mrs. Stewart would have hinted already that there are some shortcomings, because at this point in time, we still, even though the hard devices are there, in terms of the data and analysis, we have not been able to capitalize on that just yet. We are in talks with the specific personnel who are our partners in this, to see how quickly we could get that going, because these were installed quite some time already, and we, in terms of our pre-impact planning, have not been able to utilize that data just yet. However, when the information does come on stream, it will take the similar concept as to what is given in Trinidad, where all the river gauges are publicized in a specific type of way from the Water Resources Agency. I hope that answers the question.
It does, but I just wanted to break it down a little bit more for the public so they could understand what, because you give a lot of information, but I just wanted to be broken down a little bit for the public so they could understand exactly what they're there for and how would it benefit me as a citizen.
Understood. Yes. So basically, this is part of, Mr. Stewart would have mentioned, our multi-hazard early warning cache. So these community flood early warning systems are strategically placed so that we would have that early warning mechanism right in the community. They are placed with specific sensors on them so that we will be able to gauge the heights of water activity in any of those water courses. We have 2 of them placed right now, one of them in the French Fort area, and one of them, in the French Field area, and one of them in the French Fort area, and Rockville. My apologies on the exact locations. However, those were identified as 2 of the main areas whereby those are main water courses that head into the Scarborough area. And historically, we would have known that when those areas are blocked by any type of debris or any type of land slippage, it can cause major flooding in the town of Scarborough. We would have seen same in many times over the years. And what we would have noticed is that the streets would have become impassable. So as a regular citizen on the island of Tobago, with those sensors in play, we are now able to let you know ahead of time that these water courses are being impacted in a specific type of way. And then you could utilize that information to then plan your routes accordingly. So it would take a lot of the decision making to the citizen themselves, so that they'll be able to mitigate any type of hazard that they may encounter heading into the Scarborough area.
May I just add something, please, Mr. Chair? Do I have your permission?
Please, go ahead.
Yes, I think in the studies that we are speaking to in terms of infrastructure and the impact, if you look at Mr. Hyslop, specifically to you, you will recognize that being a Tobagonian yourself, what has happened in Lower Scarborough as relates to banking. Right now, there are no banks in Lower Scarborough. The 2 main banks, over the years, the number of impacts that they would have received as a result of these flash flooding events and the intensity of it have raised them out of Scarborough. They are now uptown on higher hills, and therefore that has its own consequences in terms of people conducting business in those areas. And those are some of the seriousness as it relates to how important it is to beef up that process of the acquisition of physical infrastructure to enable early warning across the country. It's very much important. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Stewart. As I allow Member Mark one final burning question, I just want to invite the officials to think in their minds as we said at the beginning, the purpose of this committee is to formulate suggestions and to find ways in which we can help you all. So I will just allow a final submission, very brief, a minute or two, in terms of your final thoughts before we close. But Member Mark.
Briefly, Mr. Chairman, and this question is directed at the PS in Works and Transport. Madam PS, could you inform this committee when those 500 desilting projects for 2024 will commence?
They're accorded to commence from this month.
Today is the 24th, and as you know, June, we are advised, is the beginning of the rainy season.
Yes.
So a whole month would have passed. So when you said the end of this month, are you saying from the 31st, or you're saying from tomorrow? When exactly are we going to commence our desilting projects? Could you give us a specific time frame, or that is up in the air as far as you're concerned?
So let me give you process, and then you'll understand why my answer is how it is. In terms of those desilting projects where we are using in-house labor, those projects have already started. We have work going on as we speak. In terms of the projects under 09, because we have to engage a private supplier of the equipment via something called an invoice, we must have actual releases to do that. We have applied. We are expecting to get our releases. We're hopeful by next week, outer limit. As soon as that happens, we already have the projects identified. We have the proposed company, because it is based on a pre-qualification list that would have been done prior. So we have everything in place. We are now waiting on that release in order to. So that's why I'm saying by the end of this month, which is next week. You're welcome.
Thank you, PS. So for the closing submission, very briefly, I will invite Mr. Stewart from Tobago, Director of TEMA.
I want to agree that this process is very important, and I want to thank this initiative. Although in my remarks earlier on, I would have indicated that I think based on the importance of disaster risk as it relates to Trinidad and Tobago and small developing island states, that we require a particular forum to address some of these specific issues. And therefore, my takeaway as I close is one will be for land use policy. That's one. The disaster draft legislations that are currently in policy draft and needs to be reviewed to be hastened up. And last but not least, the importance of cubic or small building codes as it relates to small properties and domestic properties. To me, those are some of the three salient things that I would like to mention in closing that we need to effectively deal with as it relates to disaster governance in the country. Thank you.
Thank you very much. May I invite Major General Rodney Smart?
Chair, thank you very much. If you would allow me, there were two things that I think need to just clear up so that the public is aware what is happening. So in my closing remark, I'll just throw in everything one time, if that's okay with you.
Sure.
Okay, thanks very much. So for the benefit of Member Mark, I know he spoke about the challenge where it seems that there's no information being collected with regard to what happens after a disaster event. And just to share with the member that the Ministry of Finance collects this data. They would collect the data from Works and Transport, from Rural Development, and the ODPM benefits from that data. So there is a data source. Could it be improved? Certainly, but yes, there is a data source, so we don't ever start from ground zero. It helps Trinidad and Tobago in terms of confirmation of our catastrophic risk insurance, that we have three policies, and that is part of the process for determining the costs. I also want to add in there, we would have mentioned the challenge with regard to building codes. And just to put on the table the work that Habitat for Humanity is doing as part of the whole framework. And they have taken on the responsibility of helping homeowners strengthen their homes. The ODPM is part of that grouping of persons, and not just the ODPM, a number of agencies. And finally, Chair, just to say that there are quite a number of things. Member Hislop used the term studies, a lot of studies, and that can have an halo effect. But I think what I attempted to do today is to say, in fact, I highlighted 9 things that are being done through the same multi-sectoral committee. And just to say that, there are 2 studies, but there are 9 events, including the public alert notification system that we are putting, we being the committee, not just the ODPM, both in Trinidad and Tobago. So at the end of it, I want to say thanks very much for this opportunity to be here today to share with Trinidad and Tobago the work that is being done. Quite a lot of work has been done, more has to be done, and we call on the public to give us their support. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Mr. Hussein, Agriculture, Land and Fisheries, PS.
I want to thank you and this committee for inviting the Ministry of Agriculture, Land and Fisheries to be part of this discussion. And we reiterate our commitment to working with various stakeholders for alleviating this problem of flooding, and not only for the benefit of the farming community, but the national community as a whole. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. David.
Member Mark, and your passion is, I like your passion for bringing the whole thing together. This passion is also there with myself and the CEO of the ODPM. We have met over the last 5 years, and we have been discussing this, and the legislation, the information that will actually have the legislation brought to Parliament, that is far advanced. Major General Smart did not say that, but it is far advanced. And it took us a long time to get there. And it's almost to the point where we can get it there. And the Ministry of Rural Development and Local Government on our side, we deal with minor water courses. So we are taking a proactive move now in that we are acquiring assets so that we can help corporations. And I want you to know that much of the equipment is stationed already in South Trinidad, because that's where the flooding takes place, in Pinal and all those areas. So we have actually stationed the equipment there in Palo Seco so that we can help with that, because we are responsible for the minor water courses and we're building capacity to help corporations efficiency.
Thank you, Mr. David. So before I invite the final 2 PSs, senior people in this room, I just want to reflect and to say that we have so many challenges, and to address, we all need to address our minds to this with regards to flood mitigation. And, I almost want to say that we will end the way I started, in terms of the fact that we have a challenge in terms of converting the piecemeal approach to a unified approach. We've spoken about the gray and green mix in terms of climate change. We've spoken about the importance of all of these studies, and of course the need for the coordination of all agencies, and of course the policy that will drive the legislative change. So I wanted to invite PS Francis Yearwood to share your thoughts, and then PS Hines.
Thank you, Chairman. And I want to thank you for those words that you just said, because I think it really puts the whole matter in context. Further, the Ministry of Works and Transport has a responsibility as it relates to drainage. And in that responsibility speaks to the mitigation of flooding. The ministry has sought to do a number of things. One, it has sought to increase its project output and its implementation capacity to seek to address the major causal factors of flooding. It has also sought to look at this from a holistic point of view and develop a strategic drainage plan that speaks to once again, identifying the major projects that are required, as well as ensure that we undertake and we update our studies, because that is what is going to provide the information and the data for the project. And I want to specify that because one of our major challenges, I think, across the whole process that we have to do is this question of data and getting sound and timely information in order for decision making. And while sometimes it sounds simple to do, it is actually a very complex and intricate process, because undertaking the study sometimes the period it takes, that's the least of the apostles, if I may put it in those words. It is really having that the institutional ability to do it, as one of my colleagues said, and the system, entrenched system, to keep it almost self-sustaining and generating in terms of that data. That is a critical point. I want to thank my my colleagues from different entities here today, because even in the discussion, what you found is that we are also interrelated. So the Ministry of Works and Transport is on all those committees that the ODPM would have identified, and working together with ODPM, working together with Ministry of Planning, working together with Ministry of Rural Development, Agriculture, to ensure that we do our best to bring things to a point of integration. We undertake the areas identified today in terms of collaboration, which we've already started to put that, I was looking for the word, urgency of the moment. I'm not sure if Mark remembered when he said that. Urgency of the moment behind what we do. But I just want to give the assurance that that urgency is there. Within the resources that we have been pushing, we have been constantly working, because so one of the things that we identify at the ministry is the impact that a number of things that we do have on the general citizenry, of which we are a part, yes, which we are a part. So that is there, and I want to give the assurance that we will continue with the plans that we have identified to make this happen, Chairman.
Thank you. Science, never mind, Member Mark. I understand the retirement age is going to be increased. So we look forward to your continued work in this area, but please give us your final thoughts.
Let me begin by acknowledging that not just the members here, not just my colleagues sitting around the table here, but the members of the public have faced many a stressful and frustrating situations, wondering if anybody is going to bring relief. The Ministry of Planning and Development acknowledges that. We also acknowledge that there are expectations that we would lead something, that we will coordinate something. We can commit to beginning in terms of the role as facilitators. We will do whatever is required to bring the various parties together, because as the Permanent Secretary for the Ministry of Works has said, we do sit together on several committees, but I do appreciate the need for that sort of binding, holding us together on an agreement on one plan and one strategy going forward, as opposed to many. Notwithstanding that, the ministry continues to fulfill its responsibility in getting funding for many of these initiatives through the PSIP. But also I did not mention, and I'm glad that Member Mark sort of made mention of this, we do have very good relationships with various development partners. And we are committed to having the relevant interventions from them on behalf of our colleagues once there's agreement as to the way forward. Today was very enlightening for us as well. We did not have an appreciation that there was legislation afoot. And maybe, just maybe, it will not take as much time for us to function in a coordinated, unified way, such as what you've been asking for here. So I feel encouraged. I came feeling a bit not as encouraged because this is another committee that we are coming to report on. And the ministry is very serious about the commitments that it makes. I have on hand, which I will not share with you, the many joint select committees and other parliamentary committees to which we were called and various commitments made. So it's very stressful even when we don't fulfill our own promises. But we're going to try to find creative ways, as we've said here today, to address the myriad of issues. But we're going to begin with facilitating the coming together and acknowledging that a lot has already been done. But maybe just what's needed now is for us to just bring it all in one place and take it to the next level. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So officials and representatives of the 6 entities who were represented here today, I want to say on behalf of the members of the committee, parliamentary staff, and of course the public, thank you very much for taking your time to come and share your thoughts and answer the questions. And I also want to thank the members of the media for attending and also the viewing and listening audience for tuning in. At this point in time, I just want to say, have a safe carnival season. Thank you for staying on. Be careful on your journeys home. And the officials are now excused. Thank you very much.